Hello and welcome to Super Deep Movie Analysis. I'm actor and filmmaker Lec Zorn, joined for the 13th time by my guest co-host, actress and filmmaker Michelle Gussow. And for those of you who were afraid that you were going to have to wait for Creed 3 to hear us talk about Rocky again, we have a very pleasant surprise for you. In the last several years, an alternative cut of Rocky 5 has mysteriously emerged, and that cut is the subject of today's episode. Now, this cut, I think, first emerged around 2012, 2013. As far as I know, it's only on one place online, which is on the. Um, let me find it here. It's on the website dailymotion.com, and what you do is you go in and let me pull up the guy's page here. Okay, it's the channel on Daily Motion is Sly Israel, SLY space ISRAEL, like the country, and it's Rocky 5 director's cut, and it's divided into two parts. And there are a few little clips of this cut that are available on YouTube, but as far as I know, this, like I said, Daily Motion channel, Sly Israel, is the only place that has the whole version. It's 1 hour and 51 minutes long, and by comparison, the theatrical or official cut is 1 hour and 44 minutes long, and has 4 minutes of credits. So the alternate cut has no credits. So, not counting credits, the alternate cut is 11 minutes longer. And because this cut contains a good chunk of material that's not in the official cut and has a significantly different tone, I feel that it's worth examining this cut. And before we get into it, Michelle, people who don't work in film probably don't think much about editing.
Right.
However, those of us who do work in film know that editing is one of the super most important aspects of filmmaking.
Oh, absolutely. Some people don't realize often how many takes there are of one particular scene. So that if you actually, and I guess this was probably the case with this alternate version, is you just grab different takes of every scene and string it together, you'd actually get a totally different looking film.
Yes, the editing can dramatically change a movie's tone, its emphasis, and even its plot.
Absolutely.
And in fact, a couple of years ago, well, back in 2016, I acted in a student film at IUPUI. For those of you who don't know, that stands for Indiana University, Purdue University at Indianapolis, and they have an excellent film department. I've had the honor and pleasure of acting in probably about 15 or 20 of their student films over the last 10 years. And one of them was a film called Family Jewels. And what was really interesting, and I'd like to see this done a lot more, two guys on the crew each made his own cut,
Oh,
and
okay. Yeah.
each was released on the internet. They're both on YouTube. Um, so it's fascinating that you can take the exact same material and make two things that are very different. Um, and or my favorite example is Blade Runner, which is one of the most super deep analyzed movies of all time, which I still keep meaning to do an episode on that. But there have been 7 different cuts of that released now. Um, so you know, it's it's really filmmaking is as much of an inexact science as there's ever been, and I think that this movie, despite how it's billed on Daily Motion as the director's cut, I don't think that's accurate. I don't think that the late John G. Avildsen, the director of Rocky 5, as well as the original Rocky, had anything to do with this cut, because clearly this cut was not made by a professional filmmaker. It's the audiovisual quality. The audiovisual quality is about a fourth or it's like about a fourth or fifth generation VHS copy. Probably it was just made by a diehard fan. So the technical quality is going to be far less than the official cut of Rocky 5. But we're going to assess this cut based on its content rather than its technical quality.
Okay. What I was curious about is if you knew where the actual footage originated,
I have no idea.
if
You
that
know,
ever said.
no.
How somebody got a hold of that to
Yeah,
put it together.
and my guess is that whoever did it, wasn't supposed to.
Well,
And one thing I wonder is if it's maybe this in the past this has been in other places and has been taken down for copyright violation. I don't know.
I don't know.
But to me, well, again, this is not a professional looking cut. It's I think it's very interesting because it shows a different direction that Rocky Five could have gone in. While the story, the plot is basically the same between the two versions, the tone is very different, and I think this gives an idea that Rocky Five could have been a much different film, if it had
Oh
been
yeah,
edited differently.
definitely. And just as a thing, as I was watching it, because one of the things I commented when you got here was that it felt like it was shorter.
Yeah,
And it actually felt like it was shorter because, and I don't know if we discussed it when we talked about Rocky Five, that there were times where it seemed to just kind of go on, and
I don't
like,
recall that. But,
okay, but you know what I mean,
yeah.
where like sometimes a scene seems longer, or and I thought, and you pointed out though that this particular version is actually longer, but
Yeah.
it seems shorter. So I thought maybe I enjoyed it more.
Yeah, minus credits. This version is actually 11
Yeah.
minutes longer and contains 4 or 5 scenes that are not in the original, and then some scenes are either longer or shorter or done in alternate versions.
Yeah.
Like where the dialogue cuts are different, things like that. Um, so anyway, we previously, as you probably know, did an episode on Rocky Five, all the way back in 2015, and I hope that you will, um, if you haven't already, go back and watch that as well. We talked a lot about the film in this episode. I mean, Michelle, whatever she has to say, she's free to say. But for me, I think my main emphasis is going to be comparing this cut to the theatrical cut and the differences and where one version I think is better than the other and why. So anyway, let's get on with it. Let me pull up my notes here. I've got a scene by scene chart here to make sure I don't forget anything. I started that trend with the Creed 2 episode, which we recorded just 2 weeks ago today. So anyway, the as basically the alternate cut begins with a recap of the Drago fight at the end of Rocky 4, and as far as I can tell, that's about the same, except that the music and the music is much different. That's one of the major differences, in fact, that we'll talk about later. But as visually, I think the two scenes are the same, or at least very close. And then we go to the press conference, and that's the first time you see. Well, no, let me go back up a little bit. The scene where Rocky's in the shower and
Right.
he's in pain and calls out to Duke
Right.
for help. That's the same, isn't it? As far as I can tell.
Uh,
No,
yeah,
no, well, no. Wait, no. Well, actually, Rocky's dialogue is shortened.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. In the alternate cut, when Rocky is talking, I think the part when Duke's opening speech to Rocky and then Rocky's response, I think that's all the same. But then when Adrian comes, and Rocky's dialogue is shortened, and it's more just him getting to the point, talking about him being in great pain. He doesn't go on and on talking about what Mickey said about feeling like he was going to die or whatever. Um, and there are times in this alternate cut where I think there's a lot of times when the dialogue is cut short compared to the official version, and sometimes I think for better, sometimes for worse. I think this is one time where you can do without the additional dialogue. We established quickly that Rocky's,
Been damaged by that
Yeah.
fight. I mean,
Yeah.
that was the clear indicator there.
yeah. So then we go to the press conference, and the beginning I think is the same where we see Rocky Jr. Greet his dad at the airport enthusiastically. Of course, as we've said before, this is the only time that Sylvester Stallone's late son Sage played Rocky Jr. And So anyway, then we get to the press conference though, and there's one slight difference in the alternative version. In the theatrical version, Adrian is asked if she learned any Russian,
Mhm.
and in this version, instead, she's asked if this was her husband's toughest fight, and she makes some generic answer like yes, definitely. And then Rocky's in the theatrical version, Rocky's asked if he thinks boxing should um, be banned, as some high-level official has said, and Rocky makes some sort of comment like, "No, doctors shouldn't fight." But in the alternative cut, when Rocky's about to answer, then he's interrupted by George Washington Duke. Whereas, in the theatrical cut, it's right after Rocky gives his answer that Duke then interrupts the press conference. And then the, here is one of the first examples that this version has a more serious tone. Um, in the theatrical cut, when Duke asks Rocky if he will take the challenge from Union Kane, the top heavyweight contender, played by real life boxer Michael Anthony Williams, um, and Rocky won't immediately commit to the fight, the press starts getting on Rocky, and then he just casually and pleasantly talks about his family.
Mhm.
And he does mention that to his son that having you is like being born again. But then in this alternative cut, Rocky becomes more serious and stern, and makes some sort of comment after the media criticizes him, saying like don't you owe us an explanation or something like that. Rocky says something like, "Isn't taking care of my family, more important than that?" Those aren't the exact words, but that's
Yeah.
the substance of it. So right there, that's the first clue that the tone is significantly more serious in this version.
Or at least gonna an indicator that the movie's gonna be about the family unit and
Yeah.
relationships, and not necessarily like somebody getting ready for a boxing match.
Yeah, and you see that Rocky at this point, of course, he doesn't know yet that his finances are ruined,
Right.
and he doesn't know that he has brain damage, or
Right.
which is of course one of the things that
That's
we'll get.
something that you should. Maybe he would suspect. I mean,
You would
you'd
think, but
Um, just
although
me.
yeah, you would think, but you never know, and sometimes people are in denial,
Yeah.
but or like he says at the doctor's office, I just had the best fight of my life or whatever. But anyway, so then they return home, and I think this, and there's a comment that's in both versions that I missed out on last time. The irony about Rocky when he gets into the driveway, he says he's never leaving this place again.
Uh huh.
Which is the irony is
Right.
that
At
he's
least
about to be
till
forced out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but I think that scene is the same within the father-son scene. Um, is the same.
Yeah,
Is it?
that's the conversation
Yeah.
about. Yeah.
Is I didn't pick out any differences at all. And but one thing that I watched, because I went back and I watched in the last 2 weeks, I watched the theatrical cut and the alternative cut 3 times each to prepare, and I had never somehow in the past I had never noticed just the emphasis that this film puts on Rocky Jr.'s drawing, his art. Um,
Oh yeah.
yeah, that's something that just it didn't strike me before, and that's one thing about watching a movie over a span of 30 years. You
Well,
continually
I
notice
was I was
differences.
under the impression, and I didn't get a chance.
Yeah,
Certain circumstances, I didn't get a chance to watch the theatrical cut again.
yeah,
But I was, you always get that niggling when something seems different.
hmm,
And it was that scene where Rocky is looking at Junior's drawings.
yeah.
I was under the impression that there was another drawing that there was an extra drawing that wasn't in the original.
I'm not sure. I'll have to go back and check that out. But nevertheless,
So
both
it
versions.
seemed like there was a little bit more talking about it
Yeah,
in my mind.
maybe, but there's still a lot in the theatrical version, and I
Yeah.
just never took notice of it before. Except I remember, obviously, where Rocky Jr. had
Drawn the
drawn his
had,
French teacher,
right.
Madame Dupont.
Yes.
And so anyway, and keep in mind that Rocky 5 was the first film in the series that was rated PG-13. So the content was slightly stronger in this film.
And keep in mind too that it was, you know the year, but you know that type of thing. The kid drawing his well endowed teacher. You know that wasn't going to offend anybody then.
Probably not too much, but I mean, I think most people would have just seen it as just a
Right.
kid, at that age where he's starting
Starting
to,
to notice these things.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, and in fact, actually, my son hasn't quite gotten to that point yet, and if you want to see something really funny, um, go look up on my channel. It's a film called Duncan on Social Media. It was an entry that I made last year for the 15-second horror challenge, where you have to make a horror movie that's 15 seconds long. And it was about a traumatic event where my son actually did get an inappropriate um, Instagram
Ah.
friend request that was very traumatic for him. So
Oh, really?
anyway, so
Now,
yeah, this 15-second film was actually based on a true story. But anyway,
oh, but what was interesting is I think, and something that had happened post our super deep analyzing Rocky Five.
hmm
I was talking with somebody about the super deep movie analysis and the scene, and somebody actually did get annoyed. You know, Rocky should have told him to have more respect for women and all this other. And so that's probably what made me think. I
well,
don't think people would have thought as much of it now and gotten quite as. But somebody actually said, "How come we didn't, you know,
I think
get on that?" And Rocky should have done. And I'm like, no.
as a parent, keep in mind I have a 16-year old daughter and 14-year-old son, and especially this is one of the things I learned from my parents. My parents wasted their nose on such petty stuff
Mm-hmm.
that I made a conscious effort, as their mom Sherry did, that we were gonna, for the most part, save our nose for the big stuff. Basically, what the example I always use, if my daughter asks for my permission to get a hotel room with her boyfriend on prom night and I say no, I don't expect her to like it, but I would want her to say, "Gee, Dad doesn't say no very often. He must have a reason for this."
Right.
Rather than just saying, "Oh, there goes Dad again."
Mm-hmm.
Which is what I did to both of my parents. They reached the point they had no credibility with me, which is the worst thing that can happen to you if you're
Right.
a parent. To lose credibility with your kids. So anyway, then Rocky leaves the room, and then
Now, you know what? That conversation was a little different because that was something in the theatrical release.
yeah.
There was that joke about Rocky Raccoon, and he didn't use that.
Okay, yeah,
That was
yeah,
just something
I
that
forgot
jumped.
about
I said, "Oh
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
he didn't do that Rocky Raccoon joke."
Yeah, but a lot of the father-son jokes are still present between
Yeah.
the two versions. Um,
That was just something for no particular reason that jumped out at
no,
me.
it's okay. That's why there's two of us here. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So anyway, Rocky leaves the room, and then he overhears the argument
Oh
with
yes.
Adrian and Polly, and I think that scene is the same. And at least it's very close.
The context is definitely and and again, since you watched the theatrical release,
Yeah.
part of me was like, boy, that even sounds even angrier than than it had originally.
I didn't.
And I was gonna definitely. This is a great opportunity for at least us
Mhm.
to discuss that
Yeah.
in front of the audience too. If it seemed that way, and if it was, if not to you,
I
that you know.
I think I think this scene is identical between the two versions, but the next scene is definitely different.
Okay,
The scene
yeah.
where they're where they're meeting with their advisors.
Mhm.
First of all, the guy in the alternate cut, it reduces his explanation about what happened. I mean, 'cause a lot of the stuff is going to be over the audience's head anyway, and we see that later in when Rocky goes to the doctor, which we'll get to in just a few moments. But yeah, the thing is, one thing that I believe about it, reaching your audience, is try not to go over the head of your audience, and most of these financial concepts are going to be over the heads of the audience, talking about all the crooked stuff this guy did.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't take more than a few seconds to basically say that Rocky, got scammed. So,
Yeah, the guy
and
absconded.
yeah, people know that this happens to, naive, poorly educated athletes all the time. And it's more known now than it was when the film came out. In fact, there's a 30 for 30 documentary on ESPN. I don't remember the name of it, but it's about that whole concept of athletes going broke. Um, and it says that 65%, I think it says like 60% of NFL players are broke. 60% of NFL players and 75% of NBA players, or vice versa, end up broke within just a few years of retirement. Um, it's an extraordinarily high number. But anyway, so the explanation in the alternate cut is shorter. We just know in just a few seconds that Rocky got scammed, that, he unknowingly signed power of attorney to this creep. And,
And it indicates too. I mean, one thing is like really, and if Rocky's naive, you have to accept Paulie's pretty naive too.
well, yeah,
And
oh,
he's
yeah.
certainly as frustrated because in situations like that, I said, well, that looks pretty normal. What you look for somebody to blame,
Oh, yeah.
somebody who's close by. The accountant isn't close by, and so when Paulie says he didn't know, I mean, I'm relatively sure
Oh, yeah.
Paulie didn't know,
No, I'm sure he didn't, yeah.
and he certainly wouldn't have done anything to hurt the family.
Yeah, and of course.
At this stage in the game.
And of course, Paulie's attitude is, that people shouldn't be mad at him because he didn't know. Like he said something to Adrian, like, you think I knew this was going to happen?
Right.
I want like something like, I want to bash this guy's teeth in more than anybody.
Exactly.
But then anyway, so while that is cut short, the explanation of Rocky's financial troubles is shortened. The scene goes on a little longer, and um, Rocky becomes angrier in this cut, because Paulie makes some sort of comment like, I brought you two together, where do I get the credit? And then that's when Rocky loses it. Rocky loses his temper for one of the few times in the series, and he makes he says something like, you want credit? All those beatings I took, and you want the credit?
Yeah.
And that's a rare time of when Rocky's anger towards somebody comes out.
Yeah.
And of course, in both versions, the guy, the advisor encourages Rocky to have a couple of fights to get him out of the the situation.
And Adrian's right there to say he's retiring.
Right. Yeah, and of course, like we mentioned before, in one of our previous episodes, the guy who plays Rocky's advisor telling him to fight is the same guy in Rocky Balboa who plays the Pennsylvania Athletic Commissioner who denies Rocky a boxing license.
Yeah.
So in one film he's telling him to fight, the other he's trying to stop him, And like I said, I believe that's the only instance of one person playing two different characters in the Rocky series. So anyway, the scene is because of Rocky blowing up at Paulie, it's a little more intense.
Yeah.
In the alternate cut, and then Rocky goes to the doctor, and then the explanation that the doctor gives is shortened by a lot. Basically he just tells him in about 5 seconds that he has brain damage.
Yeah.
Which is all the audience needs to know. I mean, you start getting into because the theatrical cut gets into a lot of medical terms that none of us have any idea what they mean. And so, and there's one thing though, this is more often than not, I like the changes that the alternate cut made, but I didn't like that they took out the part where Adrian, goes aside with Rocky, and tells him that when you love someone, you live with them, you live for them. Because I liked that line, that unfortunately was removed. But anyway, overall, overall mixed feelings about the alternate version of that scene. Better in some ways, worse in others. So it kind of balances out. But yeah, that was, I thought, and I think especially because Adrian really did not get a lot to do in Rocky 4, or at least that made the final cut. Like I'll get to later, there was a lot deleted from Rocky 4. But in the final cut, Adrian really wasn't in it that much. But that was a really nice moment she had in Rocky 5, which of course turns out to be her last film in the series.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, then let's see. Then we get the auction, which I think is the same. Um,
Now, that's an interesting thing because I remember watching it and
yeah,
thinking that something was striking me a little different,
yeah.
but it was one of those things I couldn't put my finger
I
on.
yeah I think there if there's any
And
difference, it's mild.
yeah,
Yeah.
and just with that though too, because always what jumped with me was that another really nice scene with Rocky and his son,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and
yeah. That's coming up soon.
yeah,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. That's right. When
right,
he was
right
on, when the son was sitting on the
on the
motorcycle.
motorcycle,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. It was short, but it was a nice moment. Yeah.
yeah, it just for me there was just something, and it was probably just the natural chemistry between them,
Yeah.
and it's something that just really always, as you know, and if they've watched our analysis of the
Hmm.
theatrical cut of five, I just thought it that their chemistry as father and son just jumped off the screen
I
in that
agree.
one, and
I agree.
it just gave a level to that relationship between Rocky and his son that didn't really exist in the other films.
Yeah, and I think that it's a shame that Sage only played the role once, and in fact, and I'll get to this in the after we finish our discussion of this movie, but Sage and Sylvester appeared on screen together one other time, which was in a movie called Daylight from 1996, but they did not play father and son, and I'll talk briefly about that film afterward because I mentioned it in the Rocky Five episode, having never seen it at the time. I have seen it since
Oh,
then.
yeah.
Um, but anyway, yeah, Rocky. After that, Milo Ventimiglia played the character in Rocky Balboa, and then in the last scene of Creed 2. Of course, and Sage, died in 2012 of an apparent heart attack at the age of only 36. Um, but yeah, that was a good scene between the two, even though it was brief, and they have several more good moments to
Right.
come that we'll talk about. But then let's see. After the auction, then they go up to the attic, and that's
Yeah.
while the auction is still going on, and that's one example that this movie, because like we said back in the Rocky Five original cut episode, Stallone was he put a lot of intentional references to the first movie in this
Right.
one. This was originally going to be the last Rocky film, and in fact, Rocky was in the script, in the original draft of the script. Rocky was going to die at the end, um, and yeah, now 30 years later, he's still
It's still
going.
going.
Yeah,
I love it.
yeah, but anyway, it's
And I think it's obvious too with that attic scene, and even still that's foreshadowing that they're gonna kind of go back
yeah.
from where they came.
Oh yeah, they're but the scene where, and of course this is the movie where Rocky is the magician. That's never been in any of the other
Oh, where he's
films of the
pulling
series.
stuff out of people's ears.
Yeah,
Yes.
so he pulls Adrian's granny glasses from the original.
Yes.
And for those people who don't remember, he reminds her that he took them off right before he kissed her.
Mhm.
In case anybody didn't see the original or has
Yeah.
forgotten, and it's a tender moment, and this is an example. In both versions, Rocky then says he's going to go down to Andy's, the bar, and if you watch the theatrical cut, you'll probably assume they just don't feel the need to show it. Well, actually, they did film a scene of Rocky going to
Yeah,
Andy's.
and that actually, um, I don't want that actually was a really pertinent scene.
Yes, and
That's a way of putting it because it helped lay the foundation for really what ended up going through his mind and subsequently.
yeah, and it's basically in the alternate cut after Rocky says he's going to Andy's. We see him at the bar, and he's very drunk. And other than basically in most of the films, you see Rocky drink very little alcohol. You might see him have one beer or one glass of wine once in a great while. That's about it. But the scene, he's very drunk, and you know when Rocky's sober, he makes dumb comments sometimes. But this time, when
Well,
he's
he was storytelling. He was
yeah,
telling something that was it was a humorous story, but
yeah,
wasn't really what people wanted from him.
yeah, he was
They
very
want
drunk, and he was telling a story about trying to make the biggest pancake in
make
the
it
world,
right.
or something like
Yeah,
that. And it's you know, and it's a if you can imagine Rocky, how the stories he would tell when he was drunk, it sounds realistic.
hmm
I mean, Stallone knows the character, and I first saw that scene. I probably saw this scene for the first time about 10 years ago or so, not realizing that there was this alternate cut that
yeah,
existed. I just thought it was just a deleted scene that
yeah.
popped up, as happens sometimes. But my first reaction was that I didn't like the scene and I was glad they didn't use it. But after seeing it in context of this entire cut, I'm more inclined toward thinking they should have used it. And the thing is, I understand the argument against it is that Rocky's supposed to be a hero, and you don't want to see your hero going out and dealing with his problems by going out and getting drunk. And I've always said that I believe that had Stallone knew what the character was going to become, I don't think he would have had Rocky working for a loan shark.
Right.
You know, um, but it's one of those things. I think I would lean toward thinking it should have been included because it showed how far Rocky had fallen,
Right.
and that sometimes when people are depressed, unfortunately, that's the way they.
And also one of the things too is that people will kick you when you're down.
Yeah,
Because I thought that here he's in effect back in his own neighborhood where these are supposedly people who were his friends who cared about him who were rooting for him
yeah,
and they weren't there for him during this.
yeah, and
And I think that that is a very realistic thing.
and not only that, but these people, Rocky was like the hero of
Oh,
their
right.
neighborhood, and like they see what he's become, and they feel like he's let them
Let
down.
them down
Yeah.
exactly. And so what is that? You find out who your real friends are and all that.
Oh yeah, yeah, of
Um,
course.
so I thought that demonstrated that, and that always is a layer to things when people go through hard times.
Yeah, it is. And also, one thing I forgot to mention back in the scene with the financial advisor, one thing that I'm glad that was taken out is the line that they, when somebody suggested that Rocky do some, I think Paulie suggests Rocky do some commercials, or somebody does. I think it's Paulie, but anyway, then his advisor says something like, "We couldn't get any because this investigation has led to a charge of assault in connection with a loan shark,"
Mm-hmm.
and really believing that when Rocky has just come back
Mm-hmm.
from his triumph, that would stop him from getting a commercial. Of course, it wouldn't.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that line was taken out of this version. That was a bad line that should have never been included. And for a lot of reasons, I've been maintaining for years they could have avoided so many logical problems with the plot had they simply said this is 5 years after of the events of Rocky Four. That say he retired in triumph after his victory to Drago, and then he just couldn't maintain that lifestyle anymore. And
Although it's interesting, and again, I'd have to look and see what I said in our
yeah,
super deep analysis of five.
yeah,
Um, I had gotten the impression that one of the problems the loan shark had with Rocky is that Rocky wasn't beating anybody up when he was supposed
right,
to.
yeah, yeah,
So I don't know where this assault would have come in.
yeah. Maybe before the events, maybe that prequel TV series that's coming out will explain that.
Because that was definitely one of those things.
Yeah,
Rocky was giving people passes on that, and remember the loan shark was kind of like, why didn't you?
yeah. Break his thumb, yeah.
And like,
And Rocky made some
well,
sort of comment like, "Well, what if he gets laid off?" And
right,
you know,
exactly. So I couldn't have figured it out because I did think one of the problems was that he absolutely wouldn't beat people up who hadn't paid. So
oh yeah, yeah.
that didn't make sense. So.
Yeah, like I said, maybe that prequel TV series that we talked about last time,
Yeah.
maybe there will be an incident like
That'll
that.
be interesting.
But anyway, let's see. So then we go back to where after Rocky leaves the bar, he seems to sober up pretty quickly, um, and then he goes over to the gym, which it's established in both versions that the gym was willed to his son and is Rocky's only unencumbered asset.
Right.
And however, the one difference though is that is the music. In this version, the alternate cut, they're playing the Michael Bolton song "When I'm Back on My Feet Again," which I don't think was ever intended to be in Rocky Five, but it did come out in 1990, the same year as the movie, so it's timely, and the lyrics of the song are appropriate for what Rocky was going through at the time.
Right.
And so he walks in there, and then he has the vision of Mickey, which I think is one of the most awesome moments in the whole series.
Oh, absolutely. We talked.
Yeah.
That really was, and it was, as I always say, tender without really being sappy.
Yeah,
And,
I agree.
not setting off the gag meter.
Yeah, and I love it when that the line where Mickey says, and of course it was sentimental because Mickey was already dead by that point. Um, but where Mickey says something like that. If it weren't for you, I don't think I would be alive. I think sometimes people die because they don't want to live no more. Um, and I believe there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, I think that I look at, giving a personal example, I look at my last two living grandparents. When my maternal when my maternal grandmother died, her husband, basically, it was 2 months shy of their 60th anniversary, and her husband, my grandfather, it was like he just sat around for 8 years waiting to die, and he just seemed to just lose interest in everything. And then, but on my dad's side of the family, when my paternal grandfather died, I mean, his wife, spent, she lived 15 years. She lived alone. She drove the whole time, and she spent the time visiting her three children and her five grandchildren, and later her three great grandchildren who she lived to see. And she had dozens of friends around town who she knew from church, or who were associates of her husband. So yeah, she did want to live, and she found ways to fill it. So it all depends on how you know how you choose to live, and if you stay interested in things.
And that was something I connected to. Him remembering Mickey saying that, then he could think about, because certainly a lot of people in that particular situation where Rocky found himself might feel like they didn't have anything to live for, or they didn't want to be a lot, they just, nothing. And so thinking about that, he gave Mickey a reason to live, and then he thinks about maybe his son, and we'd had that line about, living through him, maybe that came back to him. But I think if anything, he still had his family, and he still had a reason to live.
Oh yes, yes, and in fact, and I think the whole thing about Rocky's loneliness has been a very powerful element of the two Creed films. But again, he still found reasons to live through it all.
Right.
But anyway, so then he leaves the gym, and then we have the scene where they're moving back into Polly's old place. And one thing, this the alternate cut, this is a very minor detail, but it deletes Polly's line to Rocky about, like, glad I saved my old place or something like that. But another improvement is that, and by the way, all the rap music is removed from the alternate cut, thankfully.
Yeah, I actually thought it was much better with the music on the alternate cut.
Mainly they reprise Bill Conti's music from the earlier films. And this is another, well, this is not Bill Conti, but it's basically, when in the theatrical cut, they're playing the rap version of the Frank Stallone song "Take You Back," whereas here they play the original version,
yes.
Which is much better. And so then they move back in, and then at this time is the only deletion in the alternate cut of a scene from the theatrical cut. The scene where George Washington Duke calls Adrian and tells her that they're watching the parade go by, and then it only lasts about 30 seconds, but then he said something like, Duke says something like, once you let me manage your husband's career, you can start living like human beings again. And Adrian says, we are living like human beings. You should try it sometime.
Yeah, I thought that was in the original.
No, I mean that's the only scene from the original that's cut from the alternate version. What I'm saying
Oh.
is that they cut that from the
Oh,
alternate
okay.
version, and
I was hearing the bad word. Yeah,
yeah,
because I said that was that.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's the only scene from the theatrical version that's cut from this version.
yeah.
Which I and then when Adrian hangs up, she says, "Leave my husband alone," and then you just see Duke sitting alone with a glass of wine, and he just says, "Women."
Yeah.
And so
And
yeah,
somehow, yeah, he thinks if he'd gotten Rocky on the phone, the whole thing would have gone differently, right? Okay,
yeah,
so,
but so
uh,
that's one thing that right I don't like about the alternate cut. I think they should have kept that scene. But on the plus side, in place of that scene, we have two scenes that were deleted from the theatrical cut.
uh-huh,
First, you have the one that you mentioned to me previously, the Rocky Jr. scene,
mm-hmm,
and it's especially valuable because this is the only movie that Sylvester and Sage Stallone made together, playing father and
right,
son. So obviously, it's good to see this other scene that that was
mm-hmm.
cut.
Yeah, that's the one where Junior's he's getting settled in his new room in the basement,
Yeah.
and I guess Rocky even offers to stay down there with him if he's
Okay.
yeah, and he says no, he's okay. Um, but there was again, it was just in watching it, my reaction was, oh, I wish they'd left that in the original.
Oh
That
yeah,
was just
yeah.
so nice.
That's a great scene. So anyway, then
It just, like, sorry, everybody knows I've got like a soft spot in my heart and head for that.
oh yeah, yeah. It's a great scene, and it should have been included, and um, it would have added a little more substance to the film. And so anyway, in this scene from the alternate cut, while Rocky Jr. is lying in bed, he asks Rocky why he really retired, and Rocky, without specifically saying he had brain damage, he mentioned that it was because of injuries he had, and then he implies his brain damage in a way that a child could understand by saying, and jump in if you can remember the words better than I can, but it was something like, if I might say something that doesn't seem right, just remember I'm still your dad and I love you, or something like that. And
Yeah.
basically telling him, preparing him that his brain damage might cause him to do some or say some things that he ordinarily wouldn't, and not to just hold it against him.
Yeah.
And that's and it's one of those things that seems more timely now because it's just been in the last few years that we've learned about the lives of literally hundreds of former NFL players who
Oh yes.
who've had brain damage. And the big thing now, I had never heard of this until a few years ago, but it's called CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And right now, the only known way to diagnose it is to examine someone's brain after death, and there have been more than 100 NFL players who've died and been found to have it, and it's caused by repeated hits to the head. And there are dozens, if not hundreds, of living former NFL players who are believed to have it. And even O.J. Simpson, in a recent interview, said he believes he has it. And whether he does or not, I don't know. But
Yeah.
I suspect he's trying to get
Yes.
for people who believe he did it, that now they'll think he had an excuse.
Right.
Um, and it's, by the way, Chris Benoit, the pro wrestler who murdered his wife and their 7-year-old son and then committed suicide, he had it as well. Um, and so basically, and yet it's people who have it, sometimes they become different people. They become more violent. They become more withdrawn. And those of you who are watching this, what I recommend if you want to know about brain damage to a former athlete, um, go watch the ESPN documentary called Seau. That's Seau. It's the story of Junior Seau, the former San Diego Chargers um, um, defensive lineman who committed suicide several years ago. Um, it's an incredibly sad story, and his former wife and some, if not all, of his children talk about how different a person he became in his later years when he was brain damaged. That he was no longer the loving, happy person he had been before, and thankfully, Rocky has never stopped being loving or caring.
Right.
And but and of course they seem to have retconned the brain damage from the story anyway.
Yeah.
but but the thing is,
Yes.
it's at the time when you really think he does have brain
Mhm.
damage, then yeah, it's a touching scene that he's trying to in a gentle way that a kid could relate to prepare his
Mhm.
son for what might come.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a great scene, and then we see a scene that's I don't know how. I really have a lot of mixed feelings about this next scene, which also is unique to this version. It was not in the theatrical cut. Rocky, goes to his and Adrian's room, and Adrian has a bottle of wine and says something like "Welcome to the Balboa housewarming party,"
Mm.
and she says they'll have to settle for the wine until the champagne comes in. Um, and it's only a few seconds, and it ends with them in a very romantic, embrace in bed together.
Yeah.
And even though Rocky and Adrian had some wonderful scenes together throughout the series, um, I don't think the scene is anything special. Although to me, there are a lot of ways in which I think Adrian is such an ideal wife, but there are some times when I think credibility is stretched with the character, and I mean that she just seems like she's perfectly happy to be back here. That she
Mhm.
doesn't have any anger about it or feeling like
Right.
I mean, she's certainly been a more loyal husband than or a more loyal wife than Ludmila Drago was,
Well.
uh, which isn't saying much.
Well, the
But
thing is that Adrian doesn't have the Politburo hanging over her head.
yeah,
So,
yeah. So, but yeah, the fact that and as we'll see later, when she goes to great lengths to stop Rocky from getting back in the ring,
Mhm.
even though it means they've got to live, modestly. Obviously, she did love her husband. I just wonder how believable it is. How many women would really be that content to go from riches to rags that
Yeah.
quickly?
Um,
I don't know.
and I guess, it's obviously more believable that she'd done it, since she'd lived that way before.
Yeah,
That,
but that that she
but,
wouldn't even be like trying to compromise and say, well, why don't you do like because Rocky at one point said, I just got to do a couple of easy ones,
right.
referring to fights, and she
Yeah.
didn't even want him to do that, But so anyway, then we have the scene with Rocky uh, taking Rocky Jr. to school, and I think that's the same as it is. I think it's the same between the two versions.
Yeah, and they're talking about, people who try to scam you or whatever.
Yeah, and that's the scene we talked about it in the Rocky 5 episode where you see it's a really fun scene, the contrast between the two, that Rocky's, despite all his riches and fame, he still very much has a street like mentality,
Right.
and he's perfectly content there.
And what's interesting about that is, here he, very street smart and very wise to the street scams.
Yeah,
But, he and Polly wouldn't have seen that accountant with his scam coming
right,
a
yeah.
mile away,
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Yeah, there's a definite interesting contrast between the characters between Rocky and Rocky Jr., and we even see that in Rocky Balboa, that of course Rocky Jr. had apparently at least 7 or 8 years of private schooling before he
mhm.
went back to the public school,
Yeah.
and and he obviously went into the white collar world. His job was never specified, but it was in an office building, and he was dressed formally, so.
Right.
Um, but anyway, yeah, it's like Rocky talks about to be aware of scams and hustles, and then Rocky Jr. says, "You mean deceptions?" And then Polly talks about the neighborhood getting tooth decay, which
Right.
Rocky Jr. describes as urban blight.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, I think that scene is the same, and um, then there's the scene where Rocky and Tommy are in front of Rocky and Polly are in front of the gym, and then Tommy comes up. Tommy Gunn, played by the late Tommy Morrison, comes up and introduces himself, and in a few seconds, George Washington Duke and his partner Merlin show up, and then it's. I think the dialogue is mostly the same. I don't remember any. Yeah, except that it's a little longer in the alternate cut where Duke says that Union Kane, who's about to fight for the vacated title, vacated by
Mm-hmm.
Rocky's retirement, um, he mentions that Union Kane has no charisma,
Hmm.
and basically that no matter how good he is, he won't draw in the big crowds. And Duke knows that Rocky will, which
Right.
is why he's trying so hard to get Rocky in the
Yep.
ring. Um, so that's added, but that's good because I'm glad that line was added to this alternate cut because it gives more insight into what Duke's thinking was. Um, that he knows that he understands you don't have. It's not just about being a good fighter; it's being a good draw.
Right.
Because there are great boxers who have no appeal to the general public, only to diehard boxing fans. And if you're going to have the kind of big gate, successes that he envisions, you've got to have guys like Rocky who will really, bring in the common man.
Right, and people who might not even ordinarily be interested.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like I always use the example. I rarely ever watch tennis, but back in the '80s when Chris Evert and Martina Navratilova were playing, when I would just stop everything I was doing to watch because
Really?
yeah, because I loved that
Yeah.
rivalry. Yeah, so that's an example. The example. Being a success, you've got to attract people who normally wouldn't you know uh, care about your
Right.
line of work. And
Well, sort of like the
yeah,
Rocky film series. I'm not particularly into boxing or even
yeah.
sports movies, but I adore these films.
No, I do too, and I'm more of a team sport guy. Well, I know I love IndyCar racing too, but for the most part, I'm a team sport guy. But yeah, I love the Rocky movies as well. And about the most I was ever into boxing back in the '80s, I did watch a lot of the heavyweight title fights, but I usually didn't go much deeper than that. Um, but right now, I don't even know who has any of the heavyweight title belts. So, um, but yeah, boxing desperately needs another Rocky. Someone who,
Yeah, another colorful character.
yeah, So anyway, let's see, and then so anyway, then Adrian comes from across the street, and like I said, I mean, I just the fact that she's willing to go work a minimum wage or near minimum wage
Hmm.
job at a pet store rather than her husband, taking a couple of easy paychecks, says a lot about her. I don't know how realistic it is, but it says a lot about her devotion and really wanting to protect her husband,
Right.
um, and then I had never I remember George Washington Duke at the end says maybe we should sign Mrs. Balboa because she's the one with the cojones in the family, and I had never heard that. I don't recall hearing that word other than this movie, so I finally looked up cojones recently, and actually it's the Spanish word for drawers,
Mm.
but apparently in some circles it
Yes.
is a slang for testicles,
Yes.
which I was I wasn't aware of. But in the context of the sentence, I assumed it was something like that.
Yeah.
And it was funny later when Rocky asked Polly innocently, "What are cajones?" Uh, so anyway, then let's see here. Then you see Rocky Jr. at school. I think this is the same in between both cuts where he's beaten up by Chicky and
Hmm.
gets his coat stolen.
Right.
And Chicky, played by Kevin Connolly, who that was his first screen appearance. He went on to become a very successful TV actor, including starring in the HBO series Entourage, and continues to, and he also is now a pretty prolific director as well. So, um, and I was trying to think how many people who went on to become very successful made their film debut in a Rocky movie. I can't think of a lot, but that is one example. And it's surprising that it was the least successful film that and yet he
Right.
still ended up becoming rising from it.
Yeah.
Um,
Gave him a really good screen credit.
yeah, and by the way, it should be noted that of Chicky's two friends in the movies, one of them, Jewel, played by Elizabeth Peters, that was her second and last movie. She was in She Devil the year before, and according to her IMDb profile, she's now teaching at an all-girls school in Massachusetts.
Hmm.
So, sometimes people just like my daughter. She tried acting. She got 5 or 6 roles, decided it wasn't her thing.
Hmm.
But then my son started, and now he
Can't get enough of
yeah.
it. Yeah.
So, and by the way, the other of Chicky's friends was played by Hayes Swope, and this is the only credit of his career, and there's no biographical
Wow.
information about him on IMDb. And he's listed, his character is called Chicky's pal.
Oh, okay.
So, but anyway, yes, it's got to be interesting to only be in one movie in your
And have
life.
it be a Rocky movie.
Yeah,
I mean,
and but of course, the most extreme example, the two little girls in The Shining who played the ghosts of the Grady twins. That's the only movie they were ever in, and they were in it for less than 2 minutes. And yet they're so famous from that they actually go to horror movie conventions and
and
make
everybody,
appearances.
yeah.
Yeah, and that that's if you. But the thing is, I could never just be in one movie. After you put me in Soldier Song, I was hooked. You know.
Right. Well, and even me, after the first thing I
Yeah.
ever did, I was
Yeah.
absolutely hooked. And
Yeah.
yet, fewer people know either one of us
Yes.
than know those twins.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly. So, but anyway though, I yeah, for those of you who don't understand that reference, Michelle cast me in her short film Soldier Song, which was filmed in 2009, released in 2011, and I had wanted to work in film then, but after that first role, yeah, I was you know ready to dive into the next thing that came up, and a lot of things have come up for the last 11 years, so
they
you
actually
know
say you do get bitten by that acting bug.
yeah, so she
Yeah.
definitely set me on the path. So anyway, so
So if you don't enjoy his work, I don't want to get your.
no,
Yeah.
it's okay, but yeah, it's you just never know what sometimes passions come along later in life. I wish I discovered it earlier, but I'm glad you introduced me to it when you did.
Oh,
But
glad I did too.
yep, and I'm glad we were able to help each other out because she she needed because somebody didn't show up on her set, so I was a replacement. So the example, as long if you're on the set, there's always a chance something's going to come up.
Yeah.
Because I actually was originally hired as a driver for the film to drive somebody to the airport,
Yeah.
and then it led to the acting job. So don't think you're too good for a small menial crew task. You never know what it'll lead to. So anyway, let's see. So then let's see. Then we see Rocky's now training people at the gym, and this is something that there's something that when I was comparing the two versions, I had missed this somehow before. This was cut from the alternate version, but it its exclusion does make the alternate version even more serious. And I don't like that Polly mainly turned into a comic relief sidekick in 3 through 5. After Burt Young gave that really chilling performance, people forget he actually got an Oscar nomination the first time he played Polly in the original. But then through 3 through 5, basically Polly was like a parody of himself.
Yeah.
He was just a crude but harmless drunk. You know, but in this, you remember back in Rocky 3 when Rocky was doing his lighthearted training for the first Clubber Lang
Oh
fight,
yeah.
despite Mickey's protests, and Polly was selling merchandise.
Yeah.
Well, this time, Polly's still selling merchandise. This is in the theatrical cut. I don't know how I missed it the first few times I saw it, but he's trying to sell this mug that Rocky drinks around the house for $10, and somebody comes up and says, "How do I know it's really him?" And some guy and Polly makes a comment like, "Look at the mouth mark" or something like that.
Oh.
And then the guy says, "I'll give you 5 for it," and Polly takes it.
Yeah.
And so, whether he was doing that with with Rocky's permission or not, I'm not clear. But that's one. That's one.
It's a holdover from the very first one where he says, "Yeah, go ahead and make some money on." When Polly is like selling advertising, I guess, for the back of the road.
Oh
or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah. Shamrock meat packing.
Yeah, so he tells him he can go ahead and make money off of it. So I guess he just ran with it
Yeah.
forever.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I didn't put two and two together, but yeah, it is a funny scene. I wish they'd kept it. I think it would have been harmless to keep, but anyway. So then we see the scene where Tommy and where Tommy Gunn spars, and where you see very quickly that he has a very high level of aggressiveness.
Mhm.
And of course, Tommy Morrison went on to become heavyweight champion of the world. He was a real boxer, and in for the montage, like I've said before, um, they were paying um, actors $5,000 to take one real punch from him, so it would look real.
Wow.
And so I don't know.
So there's the question: would you have done that?
I don't know. It would have been, it would be, I'd be afraid,
Yeah,
because
that's
yeah,
one of those Jack Benny moments. I'm
yeah,
thinking. I'm
yeah,
thinking.
that the money would be nice, but
And people would forever remember you. I was victim number one.
yeah, yeah, and um and he, two of the people, by the way, ended up needing medical attention.
Oh wow.
Um, so
Yike.
you know,
Yeah.
but it's hopefully they were okay. But yeah, that's so high risk, especially
Mhm.
from a guy who's trained, you know, to use his fists in that way.
Yeah, and I'm sure those actors had to sign some kind of a release saying if they actually did get hurt, they weren't going to hold anybody liable.
Yeah, I mean, I would assume the movie had to pay the medical bills, but as far as like, I don't think they would. I assume there would have been a waiver of liability.
Right.
But but anyway, though, so this we see here, like we said before, that you can tell right away that Tommy Gunn has a problem with aggressiveness,
Right.
um, and that he once he starts beating on this guy, he has a hard time stopping, even after Rocky repeatedly tells him.
Yeah.
And the the alternate cut is better because it has more dialogue from Rocky. I mean, in the theatrical cut, Rocky merely berates Tommy for not listening, but in this cut, he goes and gives a long speech to Tommy about how you don't know this guy. You could injure him and he wouldn't be able to support his family or something,
Mhm.
something to that effect.
Yeah.
So you see not only Rocky being a caring, ethical person, but also that gives the scene a much more serious tone, and it drives home deeper the point that this guy does have an
Right.
aggressiveness problem, which is I mean, you want to have a killer instinct in the ring, but you also have to have enough self control to stop. When
Well,
you're told
yeah.
to. Um, so anyway, then then we see Rocky and Polly um, walking the streets at night, and this scene is partly in the theatrical cut, but there's the the alternate cut has a longer version, um, and in which Rocky notices Marie, played by Jodie Letizia, the little girl who Rocky walked home in the original, and
Right.
gave her warnings about smoking and hanging with the wrong crowd, and potentially ending up a whore.
Yeah.
And I had previously read that there was a deleted scene with Marie from Rocky Five, and that Marie was now a prostitute. And actually, that's not explicitly stated, although it could
Right.
be. You could interpret it that way by the way that she looks.
Mhm.
She has that kind of look to her. But anyway, Rocky's being really friendly, like, "Are you little Marie?"
Yeah.
And from the Atomic Hoagie Shop, and she's like, "Yeah, so." She has that really rough, you know.
Yes.
It's like she's been hardened by living in the streets, and he starts talking, and she says something like, "Save it, Rocco. You got any change?" And
Mhm.
then he hands her, I guess, just a few coins, and then he makes some sort of comment like, "You still have time to, um, to, I don't remember the effect of the comment is like you still have time to make good out of your life or something
Mhm.
like that." And then as he's walking away, she says, "Hey, Rocco," and he turns around and she says, "Screw you," repeating her line from
Right.
the original. And
There's something in acting career to be known for saying "screw you."
yeah, not and Jodie Letizia, by the way, only has 4 IMDb credits, and two of them are Rocky and Rocky
Yeah.
Five. Yeah, and I believe she's a stand-up comedian now.
Oh.
Um, and anyway, it's really interesting to see how characters can change because we've seen how Marianne Creed changed, after all the years,
Mhm.
granted played by a different actress. And then it's interesting that Stallone wanted to bring back Marie as, being a girl who was possibly a prostitute, certainly who had been very hardened by the streets, and had this real chip on her shoulder, this really nasty attitude. And then yet in Rocky Balboa, he brings the character back, played this time by Geraldine Hughes, and this time, originally as it was filmed as Rocky's new girlfriend, and then in the final cut it was toned down to just a close friendship with very
Right.
very mild romantic hints. Um, so it's interesting that Rocky had, at different points had such different visions with the character.
Right.
Um, but and I will say this though, had that scene appeared in the official cut, it would have been much harder to give the character credibility as being Rocky's confidant in Rocky Balboa. Not impossible, but I think it would have been
Right.
harder if people remembered her, you know, um, that way from Rocky Five.
Yeah. Although I guess you could look at it as if, because she has the son, and so if, from that hard life, if that's what happened, you never know what turns somebody around.
Yeah, maybe getting pregnant and the father
Right.
skipping out. She realized she better get,
Right.
better get.
So it could have been explained if you had to.
Yeah, and basically, and it could have been based on the age of her son, Stevenson, or Steps in Rocky Balboa. He could have been, born shortly after the events of this film of
Right.
Rocky Five. So anyway, then let's see. Um, then we see Tommy at dinner with the family, and this is one time where I think the official cut did a little bit better, um, because the dialogue is, a lot of times I like the trimming of dialogue in the alternate cut, but this is one time where I don't, because they take out the part of Tommy mentioning. I mean, Tommy does say that his father beat him,
Right.
but they take out the part about the father also beating Tommy's mother, and also take out the part about Tommy's dad tying Tommy down and beating him so that he couldn't walk for a week. They took out that part. I think if you included those two parts, you get an even better understanding of why he has so much anger and aggressiveness. So
And that and really understanding why every other person in the ring is his father, and that's who he's beating.
yeah,
And
yeah,
as I said before, and you keep is that he never should have been allowed to be in the ring with that.
yeah.
Ever.
And Michelle and I have talked over the years about making a fictional documentary about Tommy Gunn, and she was giving me a rehearsal, and I wish I had a camera running, because it was awesome. She was playing a psychiatrist who was explaining giving psychological reasons why Tommy Gunn should never have been granted a boxing license. Um, so we'll have to get around to making that one of these days. Especially now that I got a video camera, and I'm starting to make short films and want to make features eventually. But yeah, that would be a good one. And and we've talked about so many ideas for it, and I think we could easily make 30 to 60 minute.
Yeah, I've still got all the notes.
Okay. Oh, good. Yeah, I'll have to look through that. But anyway, so yeah, I wish they would have done it more like the theatrical version in this case, because you get an even better idea of his anger. So then Rocky takes Tommy to the basement, and then let's see, and I think that's about the same between the two versions. And so one minor difference is that when in the theatrical cut, Rocky asks Tommy, who is established that he was from Oklahoma. He said, "Who was your best friend back in Orlando?" Which is a typical Rocky line, that he's not real, adept at things like that. And then Tommy corrects him saying Oklahoma, and then he says Eric Elder was his best friend in Oklahoma, and then Rocky says, "No, your best friend was Frankie Fear," talking about how Fear is your best friend in the ring or something like that. But the point is, the editing was sloppy, and this is another reason why I don't believe that John G. Avildsen made this cut, because it's too sloppy. Because they just asked, Rocky just asked Tommy, "Who was your best friend?" And so, just saying that someone who's just moved into town, you don't know, is he talking about when you were a kid, when you were in high school? You know, if somebody just asked me that question, who was your best friend? I'd say, well, at what point in my
Yeah.
life? So that's one time where it's just a little bit sloppy with the editing
Mhm.
there. But anyway, so then these next few scenes I think are largely the same between the two versions. Rocky Jr. going back at school and this time getting his lunch
Lunch
money
money.
stolen,
Yeah.
and then Rocky and Tommy running through the streets. One thing a little bit different in the alternate cut, you actually have a separate scene of Rocky and Tommy running up the steps of
Yeah.
the Philadelphia Art Museum together, whereas that was merely in the montage in the theatrical cut. I don't think it makes a big difference either way,
Yeah.
but just one slight difference. And then the scene where they go see Father Carmine, Rocky's priest, is about the
Mhm.
same. And by the way, I remember questioning at the time when we did the Rocky 5 episode if Father Carmine was speaking in Italian or if he was speaking in Latin, since I know that sometimes Catholic Mass is conducted in Latin. Um, but I checked and I found out he is speaking Italian.
Okay.
And one thing I thought about, because I've been studying foreign languages the last few years as part of my strategy for keeping my brain sharp as I age. So I turned 50 this year on December 14th. And anyway, one thing that I've learned now that I've gotten some skill in some foreign languages, and I had previously taken 4 years of German in high school, but I know a lot more now. And one thing I've learned is that it is possible to not speak a language very well, but to know it well enough that you can generally understand what's being spoken to
Right.
you. And that could be the case with Rocky and Father Carmine. Maybe Rocky's parents were Italian immigrants. Maybe he grew up speaking English as his first language, but hearing enough Italian that he
Right.
understands it.
Mhm.
And maybe Father Carmine came over from Italy and he knows some English, but still is more comfortable in Italian. It could
Right.
be something like that. So it's not a big stretch for them to be speaking other languages to each other. Or like one thing I've learned, for example, there sometimes this isn't the case with English and Italian, but there are languages that are similar enough to each other that two people can speak their native languages and be understood
Right.
largely by each other. Like, um, for example, I know a Bosnian lady who works at a cafeteria I used to go to, and her native language is Bosnian, but she understands Russian because they're so similar.
Yeah.
So anyway, um, let's see here. And then this one major difference, I shouldn't say major difference, but a significant difference, like we said before in the Rocky 5 episode, um, Rocky 5 is the only movie in the series that does not have a training montage. Instead, it's replaced with two montages of the rise of Tommy Gunn's career.
Right.
And um, in the alternate cut, instead you have just one montage, and it basically combines the two versions for the most part. I think most of the material is the same,
Yeah.
but I think it was the theatrical cut did it much better because during the first montage, you see Rocky Jr. learning to fight,
Fight. Right.
and
That.
and then
And Polly was training him.
yeah, and then between the two montages, that's when he goes to school and gets his jacket back,
Right.
and then comes back and says, "Hey, Dad, I got my jacket back." And he goes, "Oh, that's great. Tell your mother."
Yeah.
And then goes immediately back to
Back to
Tommy.
Tommy. Yeah.
You know, and and it's one of the
Although, despite that, I think Adrian would have been miserable at how he got it
yeah,
back.
oh yeah, because it's funny. He says, "Go tell your mother. She likes to hear things like that." Yeah, no, I don't think she would have
No,
approved.
she wouldn't have wanted to hear that.
Yeah, and because like Adrian says, some variation in both versions about wanting, her son to solve problems with his mind, which is only possible to the extent that the people you're dealing with,
Right. Yeah.
are willing to do the same thing. Um, so anyway, yeah, I think the flow goes better in the theatrical cut because you have the pause in the montage where Rocky gets his jacket back, and then you go back to a more montage. Whereas in the alternate cut, the montage drags on for about 7 minutes, and it's set. Granted, this is better than the rap music in Rocky 5. They use Vince DiCola's training montage, which was the song called Training Montage, which was played during the first training montage in Rocky 4. Um, it certainly works better than the rap music, but they just repeat the song, to fit the length of the montage. I think it stretches on too long, so it was better to break it up.
Yeah.
And similarly, just like in Rocky 2 and then in Rocky 4, you had the broken up training montages, where like in Rocky 2, he does the training montage with the son going the distance, and then you see the scene of him, with his newborn son, and then he walks out the door, and then they play Gonna Fly Now. And then in Rocky 4, they play training montage. Then Adrian comes back. Well, it comes over
Right.
to the USSR to meet him, and then they play Hearts on Fire. So this is one part where the theatrical version is better. And then let's see here, moving right along. And then we see the part where Union Kane, the, Rocky and Tommy watch on TV, where Union Kane becomes the heavyweight champion of the world. And then this is a scene. I believe this is the last scene that's exclusive to the alternate version, and it's a great scene that it should have been included, especially because it was so short. But basically, it's Rocky and Paulie alone, and Paulie doesn't get a lot of lines of substance in 3 through 5. He did again in 6. Um, gave a great performance that turned out to be his last performance in the series. But anyway, though, Rocky asks Paulie what percentage he's getting of Tommy's money, and this is where we see another example of how naive Rocky is. Not that Tommy isn't naive, but in a different way.
Right.
But Rocky basically, these aren't the exact words, but basically he implies they have a handshake agreement, and um, that when Tommy makes it big, he's going to take care of everybody,
Right.
which is you know
Yeah. Right. Ooh,
so and then and Paulie, he has enough street sense to know
Yeah.
that's not a good situation,
Right.
because Rocky seems to be the only one in the house who likes Tommy.
Right.
In fact, actually, one
And
thing.
I think it was probably because he was just so excited to find someone to train who was really trainable, or probably, or
Yeah.
in his mind had a shot.
And also because
Everybody
Rocky,
else wasn't really blinded by that.
yeah, and because Rocky had been forced out of boxing
Mhm.
before he was ready.
Right.
He was able to live vicariously through Tommy.
Right.
But one thing that I had never noticed, and this is common between the two versions, but in the montage, there's a scene where Adrian's seeing a newspaper article about Rocky and Tommy, and then she puts the article at the bottom of the birdcage.
Mhm.
And I somehow had never noticed that before. But also, here's a little bit of fun here. One thing I noticed, and if you go back to my episode on When a Stranger Calls, I mentioned that the article about the Carol Kane character, the newspaper article, I pressed pause, and then I read the article and realized the article not only did it have nothing to do with the headline of the article, but that it was total nonsense. And so anyway, I actually paused one of the newspaper articles, and basically, here's what I can read by it. And this is an article about Union Kane, about Tommy Gunn being a top heavyweight contender. It says that person was mean and nasty, and told the car mean things about the other owner. So then the car, who had loved the young lady all its life, suddenly said no more. The lady was heartbroken not to be able to see her beloved car anymore. So to this very day, she still has no other car she will love more.
Oh no.
So, and the thing is, by the time they made this, you had VHS by then, so
Mhm.
people would have been able to pause it. I could, like, When a Stranger Calls, that's 1979. I can see nobody envisioned that you'd be able to
Right.
do it then, but yeah, for this.
Mhm.
So anyway, yeah, and then let's see, and then the other article on the page, it says Rocky is now in the management business and doing it very well. His new, and then I can't decipher. Um, I can't decipher it well enough from
Mhm.
there. But the article above that, yeah, and it was
Mhm.
supposedly again supposedly about Tommy Gunn being a heavyweight title contender based on the headline and picture. So anyway, so it gives me a warning that if I'm ever going to show a newspaper article in a movie, I better actually
Yeah.
write the article. Um, but anyway, so but yeah, and if I remember correctly, at the end of the scene, Polly's last words were something like, "It's a complicated world, Rocco." And so Polly obviously knows there's potential trouble.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we saw shortly afterward Tommy thought nothing of dropping Rocky,
Rocky.
very
Yeah.
quickly. So anyway, and then so then we get the Christmas scene, which I think is about the same.
Mhm.
Um, and then we're you know and then Duke and Tommy come over, and Duke is wined and dined Tommy
Oh
and
yeah.
gave him a $20,000 advance. And obviously, if you're a kid coming from a modest home in Oklahoma, somebody hands you $20,000.
Yeah.
Most of us have never gotten a check that big. I haven't. Um, Even though, according to the internet, my net worth is now $18 million.
Hey, you beat me. They said mine was 1.5 million.
I'd
So
gladly settle for that. So
yeah, me too.
I had always wondered how accurate those celebrity net worth sites were, and now I'm starting to have a lot of doubt. Um, but
It'll happen when a million of you buy copies of my books.
yeah.
But go on.
So anyway, yeah, we're not exactly starving, but we're pretty close to being starving artists. But we feel it's all about what's in here. So anyway, we do it because we love it. But anyway, so then Tommy comes home and goes outside and tells Rocky that he's signing with Duke tomorrow, and then Rocky, again, it's one of those things I've learned over the years that sometimes when you're an ethical person and when you're an idealistic person, you don't realize that other people don't think the way you do.
Right.
And he's saying a bunch of things that hold no weight with Tommy. Maybe they would 30 years later, when Tommy was older and wiser. But at the time, Tommy's a 20-year-old kid who's only thinking about money and getting a title shot, and he doesn't care about anything else. And Tommy, because Rocky's like, oh, Tommy, the money's gonna be there.
Yeah.
And you sign papers like U.S. property, and Tommy doesn't.
Yeah.
He just cares about the money.
Yeah.
And he's like, man, I'm 22-0. I haven't made any serious money. So that you just it's all about priorities, and Tommy probably his priorities aren't very different than a lot of boxers that age.
Or a lot of anybody that age.
Yeah, and especially like we said before, a lot of the kids who go into boxing, they're people who don't come from good, upbringings.
Yeah, and the people who get a hold of them aren't.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean,
I don't know how to put it. They don't care about them, but
yeah, and it's like I know that's one thing that from our Tommy Gunn documentary that we've talked about doing, talking about how quickly George Washington Duke dropped Tommy after the events of this in the last scene of this film, or
Right.
in the climax after Tommy lost the street fight. But anyway, so then Tommy drives off, and then here's where it changes a little bit. Adrian still runs out and brings Rocky his coat, and at first Rocky's dialogue I think is exactly the same, or at least very close to it. But then when Adrian starts her monologue, then the dialogue changes quite a bit. It's a lot shorter, and they they take out my favorite line, which is all those beatings you took in the ring, I took them with you. That's in the theatrical cut. I love that line. It's not in the alternate cut. Um, and I mean, the effect is about the same, but I just love that line because, it's. I think that when you're in a marriage, it, there's not supposed to be, you and me. It's supposed to be us. You're supposed to go through everything together. And I felt so many times over the years in different relationships I was in that when I was going through a struggle, that the woman who was supposed to be my life partner wasn't interested in helping me with it. And so yeah, I mean that even though Adrian, she can be a nag sometimes, and like I think her big fault is that she never accepted that she married a fighter.
Right.
But that fact that she said all those beatings you took in the ring, I took them with you. You do see the love and the devotion.
Well, yeah. It's just like I said, though. Like I said, she never really accepted that she'd married a fighter. She always ended up coming around.
Yeah.
That was always part and parcel with these.
Oh yeah, yeah.
The movies, but.
Oh, of course,
yeah.
And which is why that's one thing I loved about Marie in Rocky Balboa, that she
Right.
actually encouraged him to fight.
Right.
You know.
Well, what's interesting about it is that even though Adrian grew up
The same streets.
in the same streets,
Yeah.
she really wasn't of the streets. She was obviously.
She was protected.
She was protected, very
Yeah.
sheltered. She didn't have that, and so since Marie really was more of a street person.
Oh yeah, yeah.
She
From a young age.
Right. She understood that and could accept it more easily.
Yeah. So it's yeah, that's a very good analysis. But yeah, that's just one of my favorite lines, and it's ironic that in The Godfather, since Adrian is Talia Shire has done some of my all-time favorite husband-wife scenes. In The Godfather, the 1972 original, she and the actress, I don't remember the guy who plays Carlo. Talia Shire's character is Connie, and her husband is Carlo, and they have probably the most vicious husband-wife argument I've ever seen in film. I mean, it's a really chilling, very hard to watch scene. And Talia Shire, for those of you who don't know, she's the sister of Francis Ford Coppola, the director of the Godfather movies, as well as the director of The Outsiders and Apocalypse Now, and then a lot of Starving Artist stuff. And also, he also has his own line of wines that that you might have noticed. But anyway, though, yeah, I wish they'd cut out that line. And then I don't like the way the scene ends. I like in the theatrical cut where she says, "Rocky, you're losing your family," and then then he embraces her, and that's when Rocky realizes that she's right, and that he realizes the love that's been there with his family the whole time that he's been ignoring, and he doesn't realize it till he was abandoned by Tommy. But then after instead of ending that way, then Rocky says, "Well, Adrian, I swear you're the best," and then she says, "I already have the best."
Yeah.
I just thought the line was too corny.
Right. That we was talking about before. That one hit the sap meter.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I did not care for that line, but yeah, it's still a good scene. I think the dialogue was better in the theatrical cut. So anyway, then let's see, and then Rocky goes up, to that street corner where he sees his son smoking and hanging out with the other kids.
Right.
And then I know you liked the way that Jewel was being protective of him, as like saying, you're not going to hit him, are you?
Right.
And that's really, I think I really liked that character, that the Jewel. When people list their favorite characters from the Rocky series, she's not likely to get a lot of mentions, but I liked what she did with her small role. That you could see that she was a character that even though she was in a bad neighborhood, she had a good heart, and that she wanted to get out, that she aspired to something better, and rather than just accept that was going to be her life.
Yeah.
But anyway, So then let's see. So then Rocky and Rocky Jr. reconcile, and I had forgotten. I remember the phrase "home team"
Right.
referring to Rocky and Rocky Jr. originated in this movie, but I didn't. I had forgotten how often it was used.
Yeah.
I mean, it was used probably 7, 8 times, and then of course, in the middle of the movie, Rocky starts using it with Tommy, and
Tommy.
then he goes
Yeah.
back to using it with Rocky Jr. And in fact, that element, that line, the home team, is thing, um, the only element from Rocky Five that was explicitly carried over to Rocky Balboa. Um, Rocky again uses that phrase with Rocky Jr. in Rocky Balboa 16 years later. Now there's the implicit continuity that Rocky still has not recovered his wealth, which
Mhm.
could be a direct reference to Rocky Five, but there is no mention made of any of the other events of that movie. Because it was,
I know.
and
People like to forget about it
yeah,
usually.
and
We
like I
talk
said,
about that.
and I think Rocky Balboa was intentionally made so that it could be viewed as a direct sequel to either 4 or 5. That you could watch 4,
Yeah.
skip 5, go to Rocky Balboa, and not miss anything.
Right.
Um, but yeah, but the home team line did originate in 5 and carried over to 6.
Yeah.
Um,
Now, silly thing because a lot of times when something's different and it jumps at you,
yeah.
the tuna, the tuna fish joke.
Okay. Yeah.
They love that. That's not in the alternate. I have no idea because it's a corny joke.
Yeah.
What's the difference between a tuna and a piano?
Yeah.
Or whatever. Or
Yeah.
whatever
You
that
can
is.
tune a piano, but you can't tune a fish. Yeah.
So it's a corny, typical corny Rocky joke,
Yeah.
and it's one of those things that you're watching Rocky Five and you hear that joke and you go, oh, he told that corny whatever.
Yeah.
But then you watch the alternate cut and you miss it.
Yeah.
Isn't that kind of funny?
Yeah. And the thing is, Rocky, he always told dumb jokes throughout
Right.
the film, but it was in 5 where he got obsessed with all the knock knock jokes.
Yeah.
And like he got obsessed with the magic tricks and with the knock knock
Yeah,
jokes.
but you know what? The dumb jokes goes back to the original movie because
Yeah.
that was his big thing with Adrian.
Yes. Oh,
And,
yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
because he was complaining to Polly, like, go in, I tell your sister a joke, and I'm thinking, well, maybe that's the problem, but.
Oh, yeah. It's funny, I mean, it's part of the charm of the character, the
Yeah.
dumb jokes,
And so it comes back, and he's carrying on the same thing with his son.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah.
you can't, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, it was a funny scene, and so that they reconciled, and then and of course it's sentimental because that was their last one-on-one interaction in the film, and obviously, Sage died in 2012, and like I said, only lived to be 36, and one thing by all the information I have, I've never gotten any. I mean, from everything I understand, he was comfortable being Sylvester Stallone's son, and I mean, he never had more than mild success in acting, but he did run a video production company, so it's not like he was a nobody. So I've never heard anything about him like feeling like he was in his father's shadow.
Well, I
or
also
anything like
don't. I never got the impression, and I might be wrong, that acting was really what he wanted to do.
It might not have been, yeah.
I mean, likely he did Rocky Five because it was his dad, and
Yeah.
and
Oh, yeah,
just to
the-
do it once. I don't I didn't look at it as
Yeah, and the thing is, if you look at his
Yeah.
IMDb credits, he had 12 credits over a span of 20 years, and I'm sure that just with the name Stallone,
hmm
he could have gotten in lots of smaller movies, so they would have loved to have anybody with that name in it.
right.
But yeah, it could have just been he didn't want to, as opposed to someone like Burt Young, who apparently just does every indie that he's offered.
Right.
And
Yeah,
he's
that's very nice.
Oh
too.
yeah. I mean, it's it's his passion. So yeah. In fact, a few years ago, I actually missed by one day a chance to be in a Burt Young movie.
Yeah,
This is like 5 or 6 years ago. I found out about it. I don't think I was going to be I don't think I would have appeared on screen with him, but they wanted, it was like a nightclub scene or something like that. It was going to be filmed in Greencastle, which is about 40 miles west of here in Indianapolis. But that would have been really cool, though.
You could have said, "Hey, I'm in this Burt Young film."
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah, and yeah, that would have been a great thrill. Just any association with anybody from any of the Rocky films, but and Burt Young in real life, he's by all accounts I know if he's just a great guy, and it's really funny, to hear him interviewed because he's so meek and gentle, just like the opposite of Polly. I mean, it's like I saw him one time on his page, like, "Hi, I'm Burt Young. I'm an actor and I'm a painter." I mean, there's no abrasiveness at all to him. But anyway, so then Rocky and Rocky Jr. reconcile, and then they go back home, and then sometime later, Rocky fights. Well, Rocky watches the fight between Tommy Gunn and Union Kane, and really gets into it. And I think the scenes are about the same,
Yeah.
but there's one good thing though that they the alternate cut takes out one of the worst lines in the film, is when Tommy says, I'd like
Oh,
to
the
think,
angel on my
yeah,
shoulder. Yeah.
because Mickey of course talks about the angel on your shoulder, and then Tommy passes that line on. Mickey in the flashback talks about the angel
Right.
on your shoulder, describes like him as being the angel on Rocky's shoulder, and then Rocky has that line, "You as the angel, Mick," and then Rocky talks to Tommy like, "I'm the angel on your shoulder," and Tommy, like I said back in the Rocky 5 episode, I don't believe Tommy Gunn thinks of people in terms like that.
Yeah.
Especially George Washington Duke. I mean, I can see Tommy being so stuck up and so oblivious to reality that he wouldn't think Rocky, but no, I don't think he would call Duke the angel on my shoulder. So that's one line I'm glad they got rid of.
Yeah.
So then, now then comes the press conference, and I've long described the press conference as, to me, the worst scene, the Tommy Gunn press conference, that is, the worst scene of the entire Rocky Creed series. To me, if I had to choose my worst 10 moments from the Rocky movies, it would be the shaving cream commercial in Rocky 2, and then 9 moments in Rocky 5. Because to me, like I said, I mean, the best moments in Rocky 5 I'd put up there with the best moments from the others.
Right.
It's just, the worst ones are so unparalleled in the series, which is I think why the movie had such a bad reputation that's slowly gotten a little better over the years, to the point where people still think it's the worst of the bunch, but it's not as bashed as it was, for a long time. But anyway, it's one of those things I would love to see. I'd love it if you and I could sit down with all the available material that exists for Rocky 5 and put together our own cuts of it, and see how ours would be. I think that'd be a lot of fun. I don't think it ever.
Mine would end up looking like a father-son love story or something, wouldn't it?
Well, that would. The thing is that with the material available, that probably would have been one of the best routes to go, because that was one aspect of the film that didn't have all the corniness to it.
And it also is what stood out as making for me, because by the time I saw it, all I'd heard is how terrible it was.
Yeah.
And I watched it for the fact that I wanted to say I'd seen all the movies in the series. And those scenes stood out for me so much that I came away thinking this isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. Because there were these really standout scenes. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And like I said, I think that was in the theatrical cut, the Rocky / Rocky Jr. relationship is one of the better aspects of the film. It's one, it's one that's not tarnished with all the corniness.
Right.
And I think the fact that it was a real father and son, adds to it.
And there were more scenes. In the alternate cut. And
yeah.
So.
But yeah,
great.
I don't. The thing is, when I brought that up to say, I don't think the press conference scene could have ever been good under any circumstances. But what they did do, since there's no way, I assume I haven't seen all of the video that exists of all the takes they did.
Right.
But assuming that it could not have been made into a good scene, they did the best thing they could, and you had to have at least a little bit of it for continuity. They did the best thing they could have done, which is simply shorten it.
Yeah.
It's I timed it. It's 2 minutes and 1 second in the theatrical cut. It's 1 minute and 15 seconds in the alternate cut. So they cut it down by
Yeah.
almost half, by 46 seconds, and
But I guess they had to show something that was going to
yeah,
set
for
Tommy
continuity,
off.
yeah, you had to include a little bit for continuity, but they did cut it down, and they added a little bit to it. I don't know if you caught it, but in the alternate cut, in the theatrical cut, George Washington Duke just rushes Tommy out of the room, but in the alternate cut, as he's about to get to the door, he turns around and he and one of the reporters who has to question, he and Duke look at each other and give each other like the reporter's kind of smiling, and Duke sort of like gives him an approving look, as if Duke baited this guy to ask tough questions in the hope that it would set Tommy off, and
Yeah.
in wanting to fight Rocky, because Duke obviously knows that's where the big payday would be,
Yeah.
teacher versus student. So anyway, and then this is another scene where the alternate cut makes an improvement, where Duke goes, further in trying to provoke Tommy, talking about how he'll always regret it, and you'll wonder if you only got a title shot because of your skin tone, things like that. So he gives a longer explanation. You have less of Tommy throwing a temper tantrum, and more of Duke trying to provoke him, and using a lot of insight into knowing what buttons to push with him.
Right.
So this is another part where the alternate cut does better. So then you see Rocky back at Andy's bar, and then it starts off about the same with you hear the megaphone, and then Tommy goes in, and this is one part I don't know why I never picked this up. This is something in common between the two versions, where Tommy makes some sort of comment like you were just in this for the money, telling Rocky that.
Yeah.
Which that's one of those after Rocky is
Not even
you know
apparently not even collected a dime from him yet.
yeah,
From anything.
and let him live there. And like I said, because this movie is possibly intentionally, well, the movie's definitely vague in the time period it follows, but because we know that Tommy had at least 14 fights while he was living with Rocky, we can assume that Tommy had been living with Rocky for at least a year or so, presumably rent free.
Yeah.
So yeah, which is an extraordinary.
And if Rocky wasn't taking a percentage.
Yeah.
I mean, because that's the impression I got.
Well, yeah, that's what Rocky said he wasn't. Yeah.
So.
And he implied it was just a handshake deal. So yeah, to say that Rocky and then that Rocky chose not to train him after he had signed with the Duke. So yeah, it's so that's one of those head scratching moments.
Yeah.
Maybe he was maybe Tommy was a little brain damaged himself.
Very.
But anyway, so then Tommy, hits Paulie, and then I always loved that line, and it's an example that sometimes when even families, when they fight among themselves, they're
Right.
still protective of each other.
Yeah.
Well, Rocky's, I mean, Paulie's often not very friendly to Rocky. It's kind of like, Rocky would later tell Adonis Creed, Paulie was my best friend even though he wasn't so friendly.
Yeah.
And, but I love that line from Rocky. You knock him down. What are you for knocking me down?
Yeah.
And then of course George Washington Duke says, in the ring, Tommy Gunn only fights in the ring. My ring's outside.
Yeah.
But then I like what happens next when they get outside. Then Rocky starts to have second thoughts,
Right.
as opposed to getting right into it like he does in the film.
Yeah.
And then he actually ends up in an argument. The audio quality's not very good, so I can't make out every word. But Rocky's mad at this guy for trying to basically telling this guy that you don't know the situation or something like
Right.
that.
Yeah.
And basically telling him to stay out of it, and he's mad at this guy for wanting to see a fight. So then Rocky walks away, and then the fight ensues, and a lot of the same things happen. Um, Here, in the alternate cut, you see some shots of Rocky remembering getting beaten by Clubber Lang. As I think in the theatrical cut, it was just Drago who was in the flashbacks.
Probably
I
because that was the most recent.
Oh
I
yeah,
guess,
and not only the most recent, but probably the
Mhm.
most injured he ever got, even though he won
Yeah.
the fight. I didn't think the shots of Clubber Lang were as effective, but it's so the fight goes back and forth, and then this is one part where I like the theatrical cut better. I don't like the alternate cuts of Mickey that are used in the theatrical cut, where you see him standing up on a bridge looking down over Rocky, maybe to symbolize Mickey looking down on Rocky.
Yeah, that.
But I thought it was much more effective in the theatrical cut, where you see Mickey really in your face,
Right.
really fiery. Yeah, get up, you son of a bitch, because Mickey loves you.
Well, yeah, that actually, yeah,
Yeah.
that was more of a.
Yeah, that's the passion, the in your face.
Right.
And then in this time, it ends with Mickey making a harsher comment, but I just didn't think it was as effective.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that's one part where I go for the theatrical version. But then the alternate version takes an interesting twist, where finally Rocky gets on top of Tommy, and it's just pulling on his hair and telling him to give. But then Rocky still shows that he cares.
Mhm.
He says, "I got nothing to lose. You got everything to lose." So he's still trying to give Tommy a warning about turning
Yeah.
his life around. Although I also hated that one of my favorite lines from the theatrical cut is right after Rocky, knocks Tommy down the first time and thinks the fight is over. He said, "I loved you, man. We were supposed to be like
Right.
this."
Yeah.
So the
Well, and that actually, because that showed the difference in
Yeah.
perspective as to what Rocky thought and wanted, because he was actually looking to recreate him and Mickey,
oh yeah,
through them.
of course.
and that's not what Tommy's looking for at all.
No,
But
I mean,
Rocky didn't.
yeah, Tommy's
that.
just thinking about getting the belt and getting the big payday, and
Yeah.
and the women like that.
Yeah.
Huh, that tall redhead Danish girl he was with. But anyway, it's yeah. So it's a really the the street fight is really a mixed bag, for me, because there's so many ways that I like the original the theatrical version, and so many ways I like the alternate version better. But then finally, after, and I can't tell whether Tommy says he gives or not after Rocky pulls on his hair, but after Rocky lets go of him, then of course Tommy attacks him, and then Rocky ends up winning the fight, and then but then it's interesting that Rocky does, in the alternate version, stick his hand out and help Tommy up, and Tommy does take his hand. And of course, in the theatrical cut, even though it's very brief, if you clearly see the police start to remove Tommy from the scene,
Yeah.
and now you see the cops with Tommy in the alternate version, and one of them says something to him, but I can't make it out. But I in a review, on a podcast I heard, somebody said that one of the cops asked for Tommy's autograph, but I couldn't decipher that. But yeah, that wouldn't make any sense to me. But
Well, it might. I mean, he had, if they had
Yeah.
just watched him win.
oh well, yeah,
win the
maybe.
title.
But
Because whatever's going on right there. Hey, wait a minute. This is this guy who just won the title.
yeah, but I just think it's so much. I think it's so much detracts from the tone of everything that was going on. I think it's I would have left it out, but
Well, I'm
yeah.
whether.
Yeah.
No, I'm just saying that.
That
would have made
that could
sense.
be, yeah,
we
it would,
have,
yeah.
we might have left it out, but it would have made sense.
That's true, yeah, yeah, yeah. He was the newly crowned heavyweight champion, but then in a lot of what happens after the fight is similar between the two versions, but with a couple of changes. We get another look at Marie. She comes up this time. She's being nice. She gives Rocky told him that he lost his hat.
Yeah.
And then he goes thanks Marie or something like that. So this time you see that now she's being nice to Rocky.
Well,
And
because he won.
yeah. And I'm told that Jody Letizia as Marie is still visible in the crowd in the final cut, in the theatrical cut, but I've never picked her out. and I mean, there's so many people there. It would be easy
Yeah.
to miss. But anyway, and she is listed in the closing credits, nevertheless, of the theatrical cut. And then Father Carmine is in both versions, congratulating Rocky at the end. And then one change they make that I thought was better is in this film while Rocky is walking away from the scene, then George Washington Duke just says, "You outclassed the bum," and Rocky turns around and looks at him, but then just walks away, as opposed to hitting
Hitting
him.
him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and of course, not only does Rocky not hit him, but there are no lines where Duke keeps telling Rocky, "Touch me and I'll sue." Um, so I was glad because I thought that was it's I would have rather Rocky not done that.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Although I still, in that touch me and I'll sue, and
Yeah.
when he hit him, I guess I'd said this, sue him for what? What has he got?
Yeah, that was a good line. Yeah,
You know?
I did like it, and it was just like it was a way of that line. It was a good way of Rocky just accepting his circumstances.
Yeah.
And anyway, so then is the end the same? Are there any dialogue differences that you with Rocky and Rocky Jr. running up the steps and then
I thought that looked the same.
I think it is. I think all the dialogue is the same um,
Where he's telling him, there's pictures in there.
Yeah.
Because that goes back to Junior being an artist.
Yeah,
And he's interested in artwork.
Oh yeah, I never thought about that before. But one thing that's interesting is that he says something like, "Come on, Dad, we're going to be late." So I'm wondering, are they going to some kind of exhibit that's going to start at a certain time? I don't know.
Well, no. Who knows?
Yeah. So yeah, that I mean that's a possibility because I mean if unless it's about to close or something like
Yeah.
that. But yeah, and I remember it's the last line is interesting. He said that Rocky Jr. says something like, "You're gonna love that Picasso," and Rocky says, "I love almost everybody." And so I just wonder, is that maybe I'm reading too much into that line? Is that supposed to be saying like everybody except for like a few people like Tommy Gunn and George Washington Duke? I don't know.
Well,
But
I don't know. I just got it to mean that he didn't really know who Picasso was.
yeah, yeah.
I mean,
that
he thought Junior was talking about an actual human being he was going to meet in there.
Oh yeah, well, and it's kind of like how earlier in the film, I don't remember if this is in both versions or not, but in at least one of them, when George Washington Duke said, Mark Twain said, "Virtue has never been as respectable as money," and Paulie asks, "Who's Mark Twain?" and Rocky said, "I think he's a painter." And so maybe it's something
Yeah.
like that where Rocky has no idea. Okay, I never thought about that possibility. That maybe Rocky doesn't know who Picasso is.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
so
kind of like how, when Marie in Rocky Balboa says that her son's father was from Jamaica, Rocky says, "Oh, European."
yeah.
And
Yeah, I mean, I think they've never made any bones about the fact that Rocky isn't educated.
well, yeah, I mean, he said,
And that he subsequently didn't get himself educated like some people
yeah,
do.
and he in part two, when asked in a job interview his highest level of education completed, he said ninth grade. And that's why I've always said over the years it's pretty impressive that despite his ninth grade education, he's been running a restaurant for 25 years now. So, but it's interesting that.
Well, you have historically. I mean, because when we think of people running restaurants, we kind of think in terms of now.
Yeah.
Historically, what would happen is you'd get immigrants who would come over, and if they couldn't find work, they'd open a restaurant.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I mean, just find the building and start serving food. Usually, their own, and people would come, to train. So I think, that might be something that Rocky would have picked up from just his immigrant parents or something.
It could be, yeah.
And he, likely he's probably got somebody to do the math.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure he's
or
got
the
help.
accounting.
Yeah.
Because most people who don't, you have somebody, but that's kind of how I thought about that. Is that used to actually kind of be the the immigrant, someone who wasn't educated in English or whatever. They'd open a restaurant.
Oh, of course, yeah, yeah,
It's a little different now.
yeah. So that's a good point. And but yeah, yeah, he's not educated, but he has become a wiser character over the
Hmm.
years, though, and even though he's still childlike, sometimes he gets his point across. And I think sometimes I think education is a good thing, but I think sometimes people who are very educated, they see things, they complicate things too much.
Right.
And I saw that with my kids when they were real young.
Well, and I guess with me, with my background in psychology and whatnot, that
Mm.
comes spilling out all the time. But a lot of times, you can teach people to read, write, and figure.
Yeah,
You cannot teach common sense that way, or they don't teach. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
there's a lot of people out there who are very, very, very book smart,
Oh, I know people like that. Yeah.
and no common sense, no interpersonal sense,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
but they can quote every textbook they ever learned in school.
Oh, I know people like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know people the opposite. I mean, people who they can't read very well, and but they have a lot of common sense, and they know how to survive on the streets.
Right.
So it's if it's good if you can have some of both. And I hope I have I hope I have some of both, but I just try to do the best I can. But yeah, it's and then the older I get, the more life experience I get,
Oh yeah.
it makes a difference. I do try to live and learn, and I know people who live and never learn. Keep doing the same things over and
Right.
over again, and they're surprised that
They don't get a different result. Yes.
yeah.
Huh?
So, but anyway, though, yeah, that scene, and you have to look at that last Rocky Junior scene in context, that it was meant to be the end
Hmm.
of the character. Well, it's funny in retrospect. Stallone was only 44 at the time, and he was already ready to retire the character, and now he's still at 73. Gonna keep
Hmm.
playing him, um, which I think he should, because it's still a great character.
Absolutely.
And I mean, the fact that people are still interested in the character all these years long after he stopped fighting, it's a very powerful testament. And because I mean, a lot of characters aren't interesting, aren't very interesting, and well, a lot of action heroes probably wouldn't be, after they were no longer action heroes. Um,
But at least I guess it is the next logical step that he would be training somebody
yeah,
ordinarily.
and Stallone
Yeah.
does create great characters, and I mean the fact that, like we were talking about in the Creed 2 episode, that he took a character who was pretty lightly developed, Ivan Drago, and then brings him back 33 years
Right.
later as a very complex, believable character.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, but I remember I was very emotional. I saw Rocky Five in a theater, and I remember being very emotional, thinking that was the end. And it
Mm.
feels even more so because of that song measure the measure of a man by Elton John, and then those black and white chronological stills
Mhm.
that span the 5 movies up to that point.
Right.
So it really felt like the end, and thankfully it wasn't. But in that context, even though years after I thought Rocky Five was my least favorite of the bunch, I still loved that last scene. That you see that Rocky walking. I interpreted the scene at the time as Rocky walking away into the twilight of his life.
Oh.
That just feeling that with his brain damage, he might not live a whole lot longer. You know, and that, but but he was going to live out his days with his family.
Yeah.
So it's, but yeah, it was a great ending to the movie, no matter what. You know.
Yeah. And I I'm just like I said, it's very sad about his son
Yeah, yeah.
because
It is.
it just like
You
I
know.
said, and um, that really to me still was the best on-screen chemistry
Oh yeah, it was.
between the characters.
And I remember in the audio commentary of the movie Rocky Balboa, Stallone said that he did not cast Sage, who was still living at the time, um, for Rocky Balboa because he did not want people interpreting the interaction of the characters as a reflection of their real life relationship. And so that made me wonder, did people make those accusations about their interaction in Rocky 5?
Hmm.
You know, maybe he
Yeah.
got those kinds of questions, and that made him uncomfortable. You know,
Yeah.
and by the way, I've never seen this movie in its entirety. Only a few bits of it, but the movie On Golden Pond is famous for Henry and Jane Fonda, who are
Mhm.
known to have had a shaky relationship,
Right.
to have played out played out that relationship on screen, and even more sentimentally in that it was not only Henry Fonda's last movie. He died just a few months after the release, but it also gave him his only Oscar win.
Oh.
But yeah, I would like to see you know Jane Fonda's obviously a great actress. I'm not a big fan of her personally, but um, although I've liked her more in recent years, but I would like to watch it for that reason. I don't know if I would enjoy the movie or not, but I think I would enjoy watching the interaction and observing just how it came across. And so, have you seen the movie, by the way?
No, as you know, I have a revulsion to what I perceive will be sappy and nothing else.
Okay.
And that particular movie, I guess, when it was being so heavily hyped,
Yeah.
looked like it was going to be sap fest.
Okay. Yeah. I haven't seen enough of it to give an educated. Yeah, to
I
give
mean,
an
I used to
informed
see,
opinion.
I used to see the like, I guess the commercials.
Oh
I
yeah,
don't know,
yeah,
the trailers.
yeah. It was. It
And
was.
I was just like, I have that sappy meter, I
Yeah.
call it, and it just set off my sap radar or whatever you want to
Okay.
call it.
Yeah.
I never would see it.
To me, a movie that I saw like that, where I thought the sap meter was through the roof, was Robin Williams in Patch Adams,
Okay, I never saw that.
and it's a movie. And by the way, the real Patch Adams hates the movie.
Well,
Um,
that's everything you need to know right there.
yeah, um, and it's one of those things. You know, there are good moments in the movie, but they just went to such an extreme length. You know, like Roger Ebert. I mean, I like it if a movie makes me cry in a natural way. That means that
Hmm.
it's done something right. But
Right.
Roger Ebert, and sometimes I often disagreed with Ebert and as well as Siskel, but he made a great comment about this movie. He said it tries to extract tears through liposuction.
Oh
I
yeah,
mean, it was just
yeah.
the sentimentality was just so overblown.
Well, I tend to get that feeling when something is specifically advertised as a tearjerker,
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
because often that means what you just said
Yeah.
there, where they've just gone out of their way to make sure that they're gonna get some tears no matter and often then people are going, you know I mean, and that's the reaction. um, I'm sorry, my recent experience with that is for the heck of it, because on Amazon Prime they were showing Little House on the Prairie,
Hmm.
all the seasons
Right.
included with Prime, and Michael Landon was a really good writer for that
Yeah.
type of thing, trying to extract tears through liposuction.
Yeah.
But trying to demonstrate, no, it's okay to cry. It's like you've given people like no choice almost.
Yeah.
You're, and I refer, because everybody right now, you're probably thinking, oh yeah, the blind school. Burn
Right.
down
Right.
the blind school, kill a baby. And you're sitting there going, ugh.
Yeah. Well.
So it's kind of like that, where it's just one thing piled on top of another a lot of times, and it just, you've said the touching thing, and now you keep going, or
Yeah.
no.
Yeah. I try to let things flow naturally.
Right, exactly.
With my writing and with my acting, I try to make it as natural as possible, and so, and I think Stallone for the most part, I think with the Rocky films, he's done well with that.
He has.
And you know, one thing that I over the years, a lot of people have been very hard on Stallone as an actor. He's gotten a lot of awards for, and a lot of nominations for like worst actor for
Oh,
some of his
yeah.
movies. And what I would say with, I think one thing that, you know, I don't, this doesn't make me better than anybody, but when you work in an industry, you tend to understand that industry more than people who don't work in it.
Right.
I've worked in the film industry for 11 years now, and I can tell you that Sylvester Stallone is a good actor. What I've noticed is that a lot of people who don't work in film don't understand the difference between bad acting and bad movies or bad writing. Um,
Yeah.
Stallone has always been a good actor. Um, I mean, the fact that he has two Oscar nominations speaks for itself. But Stallone, at a lot of times, has made, I believe, a lot of bad choices in his career. At least from an artistic standpoint, not necessarily a commercial standpoint. But I always do this comparison between two actors who became famous at about the same time, Sylvester Stallone and Christopher Reeve. Christopher Reeve was he hadn't been acting very long when he got the role in Superman, and he was a classically trained actor. He took acting very seriously. He also did a lot of theater. And after that movie, he had a lot of opportunities for lead roles in big budget Hollywood movies, and he turned all of them down.
Hmm.
He would do his Superman every 3 or 4 years to get the big paycheck, and then in between, he'd do a bunch of starving artist projects.
Hmm.
And that's why you go out in the streets, probably 19 out of every 20 people you meet have never seen Christopher Reeve in anything other than a Superman movie. And while he became well known in after his accident, because of his
Hmm.
activism and people following his therapy, um, it took away attention from the fact that he had pretty well fallen into relative obscurity. He wasn't getting he had not been in any major movies in a long time, and then but a lot of it was his choice because
Right.
he
He
went
wanted.
after these really starving artist projects, um, and then on the other hand, Stallone, by the late 70s, early 80s, he was the number one action movie star.
Hmm.
Very popular. He was
Yeah.
he was the for, biggest actor among young males. Of that generation. Like most of my male classmates loved watching his movies. I did too. And because of that, he decided he was going to capitalize on that, and he made a lot of movies that weren't very good. Um, and he made a lot of money. I mean, I think his net worth is reported as $400 million or something like that. So obviously, from a commercial standpoint, it played out. But on the flip side, he did a lot of movies that weren't artistically very good, and that
Right.
got him a lot of flack, and that's why a lot of people perceived him as being a bad actor. And not to mention the fact that he tends to play characters who aren't very smart.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people who think that you're like the characters you play, when in fact you're often
Right.
very much the opposite.
Yeah. Or they just misinterpret. I was gonna say a lot of times people misinterpret what the character's supposed to be too.
Yeah,
Um.
and I mean, Rocky is not a moron. He's very poorly educated.
Right.
And there's a difference. Um, and so, he's probably not the brightest guy in the world either. But you know, more than anything else, he's a very poorly educated, person from the streets, and so, and also, probably the child of immigrants who didn't speak a lot of English, and so he didn't have a lot of advantages. But you know, I'm not saying that Christopher Reeve went on the right path or the wrong path, or that Stallone
Just a
did.
different one.
Yeah, they had different priorities, and certainly when you look at Stallone, how much money he's made, you can't argue with the fact that he's been a success.
Yeah.
And
Well, the thing is, and if you're going to say that, I would certainly say Christopher Reeve was a success too. It just depends if how you're
yeah,
defining that.
yeah, exactly.
Because if what he really wanted to do was be able to afford to go do, as you call, the starving artist project,
Yeah,
then he was a success.
he was, yes,
Absolutely,
and I respect the choices that he made, and that he turned down a lot of big paychecks to make these smaller movies.
Hmm.
Um, and Stallone, you know, he's made his best work has been outstanding. I mean, the fact that you and I have done all these episodes and are willing to devote, we now have about 24 hours worth of Rocky
Oh wow.
commentary out there. Uh, you know, uh, so
Wow.
the fact that we're willing to do that speaks for itself. Um, but he's also done work that that wasn't very good either.
Mhm.
But that made him a lot of money, and he was for a span of about 10 years the favorite actor of young males in America.
Yeah.
And you know, when you're the favorite of any demographic for any length of time, you're doing something right. Um,
Yeah.
so
Oh yeah.
yeah, I mean, and even like for example, I mean, I recently saw, I think it was the Jumanji movie that The Rock is in, and I've been familiar with Dwayne Johnson.
Mhm.
I've been familiar with him for a long time, and I was surprised to find out he actually, I mean, he's not the best actor in the world, but he's for the kind of movies he does,
Yeah.
he's good.
Well, to me,
You know,
if you believe that they're
yeah,
if you believe the character you're watching,
yeah,
then it's good.
yeah, and so Stallone, he's just he is a good actor. He's just he had different priorities, and he made some movies that I didn't like,
Yeah.
and that um, even like I said, as I felt like he really started to come with Rocky Balboa into making more serious, substantive movies, and then he goes out and makes a movie like the new Rambo, which
Well, that
you
probably
know
happened because people were expecting a new Rambo because there was a new Rocky.
maybe yeah,
You know
but
that's one of those things.
yeah, but
So
like I said, I decided not to see the movie after what I read about it, and then after watching that disgusting last scene on YouTube. But now he's got more you know more roles as Rocky in the works, and but the thing is, like last time we were talking, I meant to say this in the last episode, but we were going so far over time, I didn't get around to it. But you know, I look at it this way: I'm I will watch the Creed 3, of course. I will watch this new movie where Rocky trains this, Mexican
mhm.
illegal immigrant or whatever.
Right.
Um, I will watch this TV series when it comes out, the Rocky prequel TV series. My concern is this. I look at Star Wars, which is the most successful film series of all time, and keep in mind I've only seen the original trilogy, um, the first three that they made. But obviously I followed the success of the series, and after Disney brought Star Wars, you see, one thing that's amazing about Star Wars, even though I'm not generally a fan of the series, I give the series credit the fact that for 40 years they closely held the attention of millions of people following a specific storyline, even though they had gaps of 16 and 10
Mhm.
years in there.
Yeah.
And that's an amazing achievement. But then Disney buys the rights to the series, and then they make that a Star Wars Rogue One, which is I guess about a different set of characters, and then they make the Solo prequel. Um, and the Solo prequel was the first Star Wars movie to lose money, and like even my friend, and sometimes co-host on here, Robert Landrum, who's as big a Star Wars fan as I know, he even was saying about the Solo movie, it's pretty good, but what's the point?
Mm.
And so basically, what they're doing is they started distracting people from the main story and pulling their attention in different directions. And my concern about these upcoming Rocky films is I hope it doesn't take people, scatter people's attention in too many directions.
I would only hope for the prequel that they actually uh, stick to who Rocky really is.
Oh
I
yeah,
guess
yeah,
that's a way of putting it,
yeah.
because there's that tendency to. The best one I've got is, I don't know if people are familiar. Oh, it's many years now. There was a prequel to the long-running TV Western Bonanza,
Right.
and it was called Ponderosa or something like
Okay.
that, and it was supposed to be Ben Cartwright and his sons when they were younger,
Right.
when they first, and they changed the entire history of the family
Yeah.
in that
Oh
time
God.
frame. And so if you're a true fan of Bonanza, you were looking at it going, what?
Yeah.
And so I'm not putting it so eloquently, but that was my reaction. They had um, really good actor Daniel Hugh Kelly as Ben Cartwright, which isn't who I would have cast, but um, the whole thing was that they were moving to um, that the Nevada territory with little Joe already, I think, 10 years old or something.
Yeah.
When in fact, according to canon, like he was born there.
Okay.
And like his mother died giving birth to him, and there he is, like 10, and the mother's still alive, and there's all these things that wouldn't ring. So the reason I mention this is because I would not want them to do that to Rocky.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Give him this whole past that makes no sense to what we already know.
Yeah. In short, I hope it would honor the legacy.
Yeah.
And so, if Stallone is involved, I think it will.
Mhm.
But I just like I said, I hope that there's not so many different projects out there that it scatters
Right.
the attention too thin of the fan base.
Yeah, I think if it's just if you have the Creed thing going on, the prequel,
Yeah.
I think that's okay because that's. But like I said, my worry
Yeah.
is more
Oh,
somewhere else as far as the prequel.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I understand that, but I'm thinking if they're also going to make this film where Stallone is training this Mexican guy, also,
Oh,
you know what I'm saying? Because they're doing that and Creed 3 both.
okay.
So and I'm unclear as to when they would come out, and and hopefully Stallone would still be in Creed 3.
Mhm.
I mean, because I have doubts about whether people would be interested enough in Adonis by himself. You know,
Right.
um, yeah, we'll see though. I mean,
Yeah.
and Wikipedia's information isn't always the most accurate, but
It's changing all the time.
yeah, of course, whenever something new is coming out, you'll hear about it here certainly. Whenever the trailers come out or whatever.
Yeah.
But also, I wanted to talk a bit. I mentioned earlier that Sylvester and Sage Stallone made a movie together called Daylight in 1996. I'll just give you a very quick synopsis of that. It's basically what happens is that there's an accident. There's like these like jewel thieves or something like that. They're running through this tunnel like to try to get from New York to New Jersey, and they run into this toxic waste truck, and there's a big explosion, and a lot of people die, and basically the these people are trapped in this underground road, and then Stallone plays a guy who was previously worked with the emergency services department or whatever, and lost his job because he made some kind of mistake, and now he's a taxi driver, but he decides to go in and try to save these people. And anyway, there was like 7 or 8 people who are still alive, and one of them is played by Sage. He actually is a juvenile delinquent who's on a transfer bus or something like that. And anyway, even though he and Stallone, he's one of the people who the Sylvester Stallone character is trying to help. There's almost no one-on-one interaction between the two characters, possibly to not draw attention to the fact that these people are father and son in real life. So Sage, I mean, he has a few speaking lines, but he doesn't really get a lot to do worthwhile. And the movie itself, it's very state of the art for 1996. It actually got an Oscar nomination for best sound editing, but I just found the story and really most aspects of the film to be generic. Um, I mean, it's just, to me, it's just another average disaster film. It's PG-13. It's probably pushes about to the limit the content that they could have and still get a PG-13 rating. It's at times very, very tense, very unpleasant. There's a lot of peril and danger, and it's. I found it to be a rather unpleasant film. It's certainly not bad, but there's nothing special enough about it that would make me go and recommend it. I mean, if you want to see if you feel like you have to see the only other time that Sylvester and Sage appeared together on screen, it's worth it for that. But even then, after seeing this, it's anticlimactic to see that
Yeah.
there's so little interaction between them. So, to me, it's a very average film. So,
Okay.
and
But I think
so
we would both recommend checking out the alternate cut of Rocky Five
yeah.
on Daily Motion. I think that's if you're going to take anything away from this conversation, I think it is worth seeing.
Yeah, I mean, and I would say this. Um, I like, I think whoever put together this cut had a better vision for the movie, and if this person had hooked up with a professional editor, I think this person had a better vision for the movie to make it more serious, to take out a lot of the corniness. Um, I would say, as far as where the films differ, I think the alternate cut gets it better about 75% of the time. There are exceptions. There are some
With the
great
music 100% of the
yes
time.
yes yeah with the um there were some great lines of dialogue in the theatrical version that are not present in the alternate cut, but to me, the alternate cut, of the changes it makes, it gets a lot more right than it gets wrong.
Yes.
And so, it goes for a more serious, less corny approach. And I've always thought that the George Washington Duke character, and I think Richard Gant did do a great job playing the character as written. There's nothing wrong with his performance. I just didn't like the corniness of the way it was written. But I've always felt that character could have worked as a side character if it had been a great overall movie, and he could have just been there for a little, Don King type comic relief. I think that could have worked.
Yeah.
And this movie brings it a little closer to that reality. Not this alternate cut. I mean,
Right.
not big time, but I think it's a significant improvement. Be forewarned, the technical quality, like I said earlier, is not very good. There are a few times I'm unable to decipher all of the words,
Right.
but it's worth checking out. So again, it's at dailymotion.com, and then go to Sly Israel, the channel, and it'll be Rocky Five Director's Cut. So.
Yeah.
And before we sign off, I just found out yesterday that there is a third cut of Rocky Five out there. Now I haven't found it yet,
Oh,
but
wow.
I know it exists. It's called Rocky Five, the '80s remix.
Oh, wow.
Now I've seen an interview with the guy who did it. He's a British guy whose internet name is Last Survivor. Now, and I assume he got that name from the line in Eye of the Tiger, and the last known survivor stalks his prey in the night. Um, Although he has at least 16 what he calls fan edits of other movies. And as far as I know, this movie does not contain any previously unreleased material. But what he does is he he edits it to give it the feel of an '80s movie, to make it more similar to Rocky 3 and 4.
Okay.
And he showed a scene, for example, from the training montage. He took out the rap music, and he put in a Pat Benatar song from 1988 called "All Fired Up," and it fits the scene. Um, so I haven't seen it. I'm looking for it, and if not, I'll ask him if he can at least, I'll pay him a few dollars to make me a CD or something, or send it to me, and if we can ever get a copy, we will super deep analyze it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he did. One thing that's interesting is that his cut is only 82 minutes long, which means it's 22 minutes shorter than the theatrical version, and 29 minutes shorter than the alternate cuts.
So we should only spend about 4 hours talking about that one,
Yeah.
right?
So I'll see if I can get that one again. That's Rocky 5 '80s remix.
You'll have to.
Yeah.
We'll put you on that.
Yeah.
You can look.
But it's one of those things. This has really rejuvenated my interest, because I know that the original cut of Rocky 4 was an hour longer than the theatrical cut, and the original cut of Rocky Balboa was about 45 minutes longer.
Right.
So, and it's one of those things. I think the films are old enough now that there would be no harm in releasing, you know, official versions of these extended cuts. I mean, there would clearly there are enough fans who would buy the DVDs to make it worthwhile. Um,
Well, if anybody who has any what say in the matter happens
yeah,
to be watching,
yeah,
and I always hope that.
yeah, it'd be great to see the full versions of these movies, and and it's another example that I would like to see more examples of different people making their own cuts of movies
Hmm.
and seeing what you can do with them,
Yeah.
because the editing makes such a big difference.
Yep.
So anyway, in conclusion, Rocky Five, I think overall of the original cut, there's more I like than I don't like, but I think a more serious approach and a better story and setting the movie 5 years later than rather than immediately after Rocky Four could have made it better. And I think this alternate cut gives us a little clue about how the movie could have been improved.
And of course, like I said, what jumped out at me was the extra scenes between Sylvester Stallone and his son.
And especially
Worth it to watch. Worth it to watch just for those.
Yeah, especially even more so since obviously Sage had such a short career, and especially in appearing with his father. So yeah, it definitely worth a look. And I think again, I think like obviously, like I said, this was made by someone who's not a professional filmmaker or not a professional editor, but someone who did have a good vision for how the film could have been improved.
Yeah.
And for that reason, I recommend it.
Absolutely. Same here.
Any last words?
I'm done.
Okay. Well, glad we didn't have to wait a year and a half or more until Creed 3 comes out. Till Creed 3 comes out
Yeah.
to talk more about Rocky. So it's always good to do another episode. Hopefully, we'll get a hold of that Rocky 580s remix soon. And in the meantime, I've got some other episodes on the agenda. Solo and probably some with Michelle, some with other hosts, and anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and feel free to share this video, and feel free to like Super Deep Movie Analysis on Facebook,
and check out my show On the Couch with Michelle Gussow.
Yes, do that as well
on YouTube.
Yes, and you can subscribe to her channel as well, and so you get updates whenever she uploads a new episode.
There you go.
So anyway, it's great to talk more about Rocky. Look forward to the next time. Hopefully we won't have to wait till Creed 3, but
Hopefully not.
look forward to whatever it is, because it's always something that occupies a lot of our time. And we went 2 hours 51 minutes with the Creed 2 episodes. We're 2:28 on this, so not too far behind.
No.
So. All right. Well, anyway, I got to get back to work. But again, this concludes the episode. Are you done?
I'm done.
Okay. All right. Just making sure, because I always give the guest host the last word. So anyway, this concludes the episode. As always, thank you so much for joining us, and I cordially invite you to do so again in the near future for further super deep movie analysis. Until then, this is Lec Zorn and Michelle Gussow reminding you, there is a difference only you can make. You're right.